there. You just...
that we are hosting for the second year with Absa Bank. And the post-budget dialogue aims at putting the budget in perspective. The theme for this engagement is managing the risks, vulnerabilities, and uncertainties that await budget implementation in the financial year 2023-2024. We are confident that the discussions that will be held here today will go a long way in helping business captains and our viewers who are watching this event understand the budget in detail and also understand the challenges that lie ahead in regards to implementation of this budget. NTV is a private company owned by Nation Media Group, and I will speak as a private sector player. We know that the private sector remains constrained with the high cost of capital. And Mr. Chief Guest, we are grateful to the government for the policy shift in reducing the cost of money for the private sector. We have seen a deliberate policy being championed to reduce domestic borrowing, which is a major driver for commercial bank lending rates alongside the CBR rate. In addition, in the budget proposals read yesterday, or the budget speech from the minister, we have seen a deliberate decision by government to provide long-term and affordable capital through Uganda Development Bank. We think that will ease the pressures on the cost of money in the economy. However, Mr. Guest of Honor, sir, we do not see a stimulus in this budget presentation. If it is there, we shall wait to hear from you, because to enable private sector growth, there has to be a stimulus package by government to support growth of that sector. In regards to domestic areas, we saw a small allocation, so we are not certain the pressures that the contractors and government suppliers will undergo in the financial year 2023-2024, but I'm sure you will elaborate on that matter. We've also seen an increase in human capital development, which is a good gesture by government in terms of skilling the population to create jobs, because it is jobs that chases poverty, but not aid. Aid will be an enabler, but jobs will eradicate poverty. The parish development model to uplift rural households from the poverty bracket is also a good initiative by government. That is one pillar of financial inclusion under the parish development model. My plea to you, sir, is let there be proper structures in the management of the PDM. There are many speakers here. I do not want to preempt what others will say. I will stop here for now. It's my pleasure to invite our chief host and chief convener for this event, Absa Bank, the managing director, Mr. Mumba Karifungwa. Please step forward and give your remarks.
The Permanent Secretary and Secretary to the Treasury, Dr. Ramatan Gubi, Absa board members present, the General Manager, NTV Uganda, Mr. Johnson Omolo, distinguished speakers this morning, and panelists, our esteemed customers and business associates, members of the Absa Uganda Country Management Committee, my colleagues from Absa Uganda, members of the press, our online audience, must I simply say, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. Thank you for joining us today for this post-budget dialogue discussion. I am honored to be here as we take a deep dive into the financial year 2023-24 national budget that is anchored on full monetization of the Ugandan economy through commercial agriculture, industrialization, and expanding markets. Platforms such as this forum are essential for mutual understanding, collaboration, policy alignment, problem solving, and ultimately fostering economic growth and development. They create a platform for open communication on the national budget, to dissect it in terms of opportunities and challenges, and how best the private sector and government can together work towards achieving the objectives. I would like to start by congratulating the Ministry of Finance and National Finance Planning and Economic Development and the Permanent Secretary and Secretary to the Treasury for having successfully concluded preparations and final dissemination of the full year 2023-24 budget that was delivered to the public yesterday. The financial year 2023-24 national budget represents a crucial milestone in Uganda's economic development. It sets the tone for fiscal policy and outlines the government's priorities for the coming year. I'm sure a number of us, as my colleague Johnson has indicated, are anxious to know or to hear from the PSST into how this translates to poverty reduction and overall economic growth and development. As we gather here today, it is essential for us to engage in a meaningful and constructive discussion about the implications of the budget and how it will shape the economy, business environment, and impact to the entire private sector. The stability and resilience of the financial sector is paramount for sustainable economic development. We appreciate the tireless efforts of the central bank towards ensuring the financial sector is solid and supporting initiatives to increase customer confidence in the sector. As a private sector-led economy, Uganda's economic growth is hinged on the strength and buoyancy of its private sector to create jobs, increase incomes, thus contributing to living conditions, of course, in partnership with the central government. In the full-year budget, a total of 33.6 trillion was allocated to 20 programs, with human capital development taking the biggest share. The 20 programs will go a long way in spurring private sector growth. Some of the salient areas that we picked out from the budget that are worthy of mention is the allocation towards agro-industrialization of 1.787 trillion of the national budget, and a 19.24% increase in allocation to this particular line. This will in turn help to diversify Uganda's economy by moving beyond raw agricultural products and venturing into high value-adding activities. This diversification can reduce the country's reliance on traditional agricultural exports, create new job opportunities, and stimulate economic growth. Private sector development is another key area where 1.864 trillion or 3.35% of the budget has been allocated. Being a private sector-led economy, Uganda's economic growth depends on the strength and buoyancy of its private sector to create jobs, increase incomes, and improved living conditions. In the full year 2023-24 budget, government will promote efforts to lower production costs to promote competitive production of affordable goods, access to continued affordable credit, agricultural credit facility, and the small business recovery funds, and EMIOGA as amongst the interventions to stimulate growth. As businesses access more credit, they expand and create more jobs, hence increasing aggregate demand in an economy and demand for services, including banking. Human capital development, as was alluded to, has gotten the lion's share of the budget, and this is commendable because having a skilled workforce is critical for development, and it is the greatest resource that any government or company has. The allocation to governance and security continues to be an important vote, as without a secure environment, the ability to do business in an open and transparent competitive manner can be impeded. Focus on integrated transport, infrastructure and services. An allocation of 4.4 trillion in infrastructure development remains a critical driver of economic growth. I am glad that integrated transport infrastructure and service programs in the full year 23-24 was allocated this amount, which is an increase of 186 billion from the previous year. According to the parliamentary report of the annual budget estimates in 2023-2024, the next financial year's budget also prioritizes upgrading our transport infrastructure by beginning the construction of the standard gauge railway (SGR) and road maintenance programs for various access routes. Developing a robust and efficient transportation network is crucial to facilitate trade, connecting regions, and supporting economic activities. Well-maintained infrastructure enhances connectivity, reduces transportation costs, and improves accessibility to markets, thereby stimulating economic growth. A number of other critical areas have been invested in, areas to do with development plan implementation, sustainable energy developments, and regional balanced development, to name but a few. I look forward to the discussions this morning, especially as we delve into a conversation around key issues such as the growing accumulation of domestic arrears, which continues to have an impact on the private sector. According to the Auditor General's report for 2022, domestic arrears increased from 4.6 trillion in 2021 to 7.5 trillion in 2022. According to budgetary allocations, and I did hear Johnson allude to this, we have seen an allocation of 205 billion towards domestic arrears. And the question we ask is, should this be an area of concern? And I am confident that PSST will ably give us the context around this. In terms of key macroeconomic developments in the economy, we are informed that Uganda's economy grew by 5.3% in full year 22 versus 23, compared to 4.7% in the prior fiscal year. For 2023/24, the growth is projected to come in at 6%, and this is quite commendable, seeing where global and regional growth is projected to be. The outlook is premised on the recovery of aggregate demand due to the expected decline in inflation, continued implementation of the parish development model, increased investment in oil and gas activities, and increase in regional trade, to name but a few of the drivers of this recovery. It is also worth noting that the annual headline inflation during the month of May 2023 declined to 6.2% from 8% registered in April 2023 and 10.4% registered in January 2023. So that shows the progress that is being made in terms of managing inflation and typically stimulating growth. Additionally, the Bank of Uganda has kept the central bank rate at 10% in a bid to further contain inflation, and both headline and core inflation are forecasted to reach 5% in the third quarter of 2023 and remain stable over the medium term. I must recognize the work of the Bank of Uganda and Ministry of Finance for using both monetary and fiscal policy to curb inflation. I remain optimistic that reduced inflation, will ultimately lead to a reduction of goods and services in the long run and an improvement in the livelihoods. Investors are more likely to make long-term investment decisions when they can confidently predict future costs and returns. This stability encourages both domestic and foreign investment, leading to increased business activity, job creation, and economic development. Lastly, I want to emphasize the importance of collaborative partnerships. The goals that are outlined in the budget require collective support from various stakeholders, be it government, be it private sector, be it individuals and employees of various industries. As Absa Bank Uganda, we believe in fostering collaboration with the government, regulators, other financial institutions, our customers, to mention but a few. Together, we can create an enabling environment for economic growth, innovation, and financial inclusion. As I conclude, the financial year 2023-24 budget presents us both with challenges and opportunities. By engaging in an open and constructive dialogue, we can navigate through these times effectively. Absa Uganda remains committed to the growth of the economy through empowering SMEs, embracing digital transformation, and promoting sustainable and responsible banking practices, which is aligned to our purpose of empowering Africa's tomorrow together, one story at a time. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you once again and wish you pleasant deliberations for the rest of the morning. And I look forward to an insightful discussion. I thank you for your attention. At this juncture, it's my distinguished honor and pleasure to invite the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury to give us his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start with all of the senior leaders, if they are in the room of government. Of course, the Managing Director of Absa, the General Manager of NTV, Uganda, the Vice Chancellor, Professor, you are most welcome, of Makerere University, the Executive Director, CS BAG, and of course, our Executive Director of the Central Bank, in charge of research, Dr. Mugume. I saw him walking in. All of the business leaders present, and all Ugandans, wherever they are. Good morning to you all. I would like to begin by thanking the organizers of this dialogue of our national budget after it was presented yesterday. That's NTV Uganda, Absa Bank, and your partners, as well as all the participants. As you are aware, we are here to discuss how we could manage the risks, the vulnerabilities and uncertainties related to the implementation of this budget next year, financial year, which is beginning in a couple of weeks. But ultimately, the mindset, all our mindset, should be on maximizing the opportunities that are presented by this budget, the number of opportunities in the budget. And I would request that as we contemplate on the risks, let's tune our mind to how do we as Ugandans take full advantage of the opportunities presented in this budget. As you heard from the minister's speech yesterday, the overall goal of the budget next year and over the medium term is to redirect more resources that we get from you through the taxes and also the money that we borrow towards wealth creation. We want to direct most of those resources towards wealth creation by facilitating more Ugandans to join the money economy, but also to do business, facilitate those who are in business to do profitable business, so that we can accelerate rapid expansion of the economy and industrialization. Through this budget of next year, government is looking to accelerate our full monetization of the economy. We would want more Ugandans to join the monetary economy so that we can achieve socio-economic transformation. These words they may sound bombastic, but what simply we are meaning here, please Ugandans, we shall not transform ourselves when there are just a few of us in the greater Kampala metropolitan area and a few other towns who are participating in economic activities. We need to get all of the 8+ million households in Uganda make money, earn some income, work when they are working for money. Many Ugandans are working so hard just to eat and sleep. They graze a few animals, they till the land just to get food. We celebrate a lot that thing, food. We have food in Uganda. Eating is good, but making money is far much better. We would want to see all Ugandans make some money. So the new budget has prioritized a number of things, but I want to tell you that when we talk about these 12 things, we have more or less covered the national budget of next year. Number one is the effective implementation of our parish development model. This is the gist of this budget. How do we effectively implement the parish development model to lift more Ugandans out of subsistence economy? Mr. Omoro, this is stimulus number one. 1.1 trillion shillings is going to the lowest level possible in Uganda next financial year. Another 1.1 trillion has gone there this year. I left a meeting this morning agreeing on sending the last batch of the money. And this money is with these banks, Absa and others. The people have not yet learned the discipline of picking it quickly. What we are doing differently now from the past, we are not just throwing this money around. The people who are going to be utilizing these resources must be prepared. That's why we are sending this money to their account so that this talk also stops. Government is lying. They are just talking. There's no money. We have sent there the 50 million per parish. It's already there, but very few people have picked it. They want, of course, they are lining up to pick it, but we are saying, no, you must tick the following boxes. You must show us what you are going to do with the money, and we must also train you and be able to trace you. We are working on a robust system to follow up these monies. So that is the first major stimulus, effective implementation of this PDM. We hope within 5 years we shall be able to have about 5.5 trillion shillings at the lowest level of our economy, serving those who are unbanked, those whom the Absas do not reach. They are there, they're out of the economy. And we accepted that as long as a few are willing to move, let us go with, no, we are saying let's include everybody. The second major priority of this budget is upgrading the transport infrastructure. As the minister told you, we are beginning the construction of the standard gauge railway. We have allocated money to start this. The talk has been on for a long time. We have studied and overstudied. Now we want to hit the ground and run, and we will see activities leading to the construction of this SGR. Of course, there will be a lot of debate. We are going to have this discussion. Should it be a priority? There are still those who are asking that question. At a time when we are constrained, why do we spend $2 billion on the SGR? Uganda is a landlocked country, ladies and gentlemen. We are locked in the land of Kenya and Tanzania. For us to be able to transform ourselves, we need a competitive transport system. What we are doing now is a joke. Moving cargo on 800 miles on these small roads like this Ginger Road. That's why it is cut into two pieces. The left-hand side, as you are coming from Ginger towards Kampala, has sunk in because of the weight of the imports. The right-hand side, as you go to Ginger, is okay. So as I usually tell people, our balance of trade in Uganda is stamped on our small road, which connects us to Mombasa. We must sort out this. We must ensure that we get cargo off these small roads. That's when our businesses will be competitive. That's when we shall be able to produce and export our manufactured products. And without industrialization, forget about socio-economic transformation. So we are starting the SGR. We are also finalizing the rehabilitation of the meter gauge so that it can be the stopgap measure as we do the SGR, but also stepping up road maintenance. Road maintenance. We have constructed roads in Uganda in the last 10 years, tarmacked most of the roads which connect the country. Now you move on tarmac from border to border across the country, but we are not maintaining them. We are also not maintaining the dry weather roads which connect the villages to now the tarmac, where the gardens are and the farms and the small factories. They are not connected to the tarmac with the good roads. That's where now we are putting emphasis. The other day, yesterday but one, I was with one of the former members of parliament in the UK, the House of Lords, in my office there, a man who's now in a business of mobilizing clean financing, this climate financing. He came here and he has driven around the country than I've ever done in 1 week. He has been to Moroto, he has been to Chisoro, he has been to Hoima, and he told me which other place. He told me, younger man, he called me a younger man, you have better roads now connecting your country than the roads we have in the UK, the country roads. I told him, but you know, here in Uganda we think we are among the worst. He said, I'm telling you now, you have better roads connecting the country than the roads we have in the UK. You just need to take full advantage of what you have now by also doing the roads within the center here. And that's where we are now putting emphasis. So Greater Kampala metropolitan area is going to see a huge overhaul of the infrastructure as well in the beginning this coming financial year. We have acquired the money. We are going to start the work. The third one is promoting small-scale solar-powered irrigation so that we can adapt ourselves to climate change. We have also gone beyond words, and everything I'm reading has resources which the minister read to you, and you know it anyway. Our national budget is an open book. The minister was just summarizing it, but we have been discussing it over time since Parliament received it in December, and we are still talking about it. The fourth one is supporting science-based research and development so that we can kickstart a knowledge-based economy. We are putting resources also in areas of research, the areas led by wise people like Professor Nawangwe and his team at Makerere. We want to get that research which our wise people have been just putting in journals to become professors, and that's all. Yeah, the president has mobilized them. He has completely now taken up the responsibility, even taken up the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, and we are facilitating them going forward so that they can build another segment of the economy, a knowledge-based economy. The fifth area is continued support to private sector so that private sector can access affordable and patient capital. Through a number of initiatives, government is continuing to capitalize UDB. Now it has a capital base of about 1.4 trillion. We are capitalizing them every year. Next year we shall add on that capital, both by government budget allocation, but also by giving them guarantees and the access credit lines, which can give you, the business people, patient capital. Emyoga, they are also being capitalized to support now another layer of people who can't go to UDB, but they have to do business in those markets and the garages and so on. UDC, the investment arm of the state, is also being supported to acquire equity and do business with those who can't easily get debt, but they are in strategic areas that we want to develop. Agricultural Credit Facility, which is a government initiative being managed very well by the Bank of Uganda in partnership with our commercial banks and other financial institutions that are supervised by the central bank. Now it has, I think, a portfolio of over 740 billion Uganda shillings. It's an area which we haven't been capitalizing. I think it's something we need to put in more capital. It is supporting our farmers to add value and also to commercialize. We have also a small business recovery fund, which we started to support, to stimulate the economy of smaller people, the SMEs, but which are formalized. We started with the 200 billion, 100 by government, 100 by the participating finance institutions. The uptake has been poor of this fund, and we are going to discuss, because we made some adjustments, but still And it is actually an indictment to our also business community here. It means most of our SMEs, which are capital constrained, are also not creditworthy because they are not formalized, they don't keep books of accounts, in other words, they can't access money. They can't have the ability to access money. Because there are so many Ugandans who are saying, COVID affected us. My restaurant can't reopen, my primary or nursery school was closed, my salon doesn't have working capital, and so on. But those people, we gave them a facility, but they can't access it. When they go, the banks turn them away. This is a facility which gives people money at 10%, because government forfeited the interest, told the banks, you charge the interest on the 200 billion, but when you have contributed only 100, using the SCF model. But it's not being utilized. We are going to have a discussion with the Bank of Uganda on how best we could utilize this resource. If it can't be utilized in that format, we can find another way. We are also trying to finalize arrangement where we're going to support commercial farmers who are creditworthy. Again, creditworthiness is very important. Those who can walk into a financial institution and get money, but the only thing perhaps which is disturbing them is the high interest rate and so on. This is how government we are coming in. We offered to pay the interest on behalf of commercial farmers. We are finalizing that arrangement so that big commercial farmers who want to produce food, who want to produce beef for export, can now access money. You only pay back at the principal. Government pays the interest. We are finalizing the arrangement, and it is part of this coming budget. We are also having microfinance support center on lending to SACCOs, and we are capitalizing them even in this coming budget. So in total, there is 2.7 trillion shillings in this budget on those initiatives I've mentioned. So Omoro is not here. Stimulus. We are stimulating the private sector. And now, as if that was not enough, we are in the coming year beginning to implement an initiative, a grant called Invite with the World Bank. And we have also given it to Bank of Uganda, as well as Private Sector Foundation Uganda. I haven't seen PSFU here. Are they around? Oh, okay, Dr. Mag is here. PSFU and the Bank of Uganda, they are going to enable SMEs that are export-oriented to access a grant which is getting to over $218 million in the next couple of years. It's a project we are finalizing its disbursement. We have gone through Parliament, and now we shall be able to disburse this money. Ladies and gentlemen, $218 million, we are talking about over 810 billion shillings going into supporting SMEs. Those that are export-oriented mainly. We have also another one, which we are implementing beginning this coming year, called the GROW project. Again, with the World Bank, we got a grant of $217 million, something again over 800 billion shillings, for generating growth opportunities and productivity for women enterprises. This is now for women. Women who want to graduate from being informal to formal or grow their businesses. We have brought them money, a grant, free money, which they can utilize. And we want more stimulus, more stimuli, and we are stimulating the economy. Another area, another key intervention, a priority in this budget, is building infrastructure in industrial parks. Our industrial parks, we want to connect them to reliable electricity, water, paved roads, ICT, and other relevant infrastructure. We are progressing quite well with the Namamve. Those who are operating in Namamve, there is some ongoing work there. With the Lagandot, they have been having some issues because, you know, the park was not very well planned at the beginning. Some people built where they're supposed to be a road, they put there a perimeter. Others put even a full-fledged factory in the middle of a roadway. So all power lines, we are trying to address that. But now we are moving, also supporting the private industrial parks. This year we've released 40 billion shillings to build infrastructure in Mbale, that industrial park in Mbale and in Kapeka. They are some of the fastest growing industrial parks, not only in Uganda but in this region. If you see the activity going on there, we are going to support them. And also Buikwe, there is Park there. We are building helping to build the infrastructure, the road network especially, so that, but also substations. We are building more substations for power. Investment in oil and gas is another area, because we want to start production of oil on schedule. There is a beehive of activities in the oil region there. So as we discuss, ladies and gentlemen, the uncertainties, let us discuss also the certainties. One of the certainties is oil activities are going on, and not by chance, but because of the deliberate policy of government to support this area. We have fully capitalized the UNOC as government of Uganda. From taxpayers' money, we haven't borrowed a coin, and fully capitalized them. And they are co-investing with Total and Sinok and other companies to ensure that all our activities are on schedule. I will give you a few numbers later on oil and gas. I don't know whether Ernest is here. These are the people who should not miss in the room anymore. Every time you're having conversation, please invite a man called Ernest Rubondo. Is he here? Does he have a representative? These are the people you should listen to. They are people of certainties, not uncertainty alone. We have also investment in tourism promotion and development in the market. I mean to market Uganda. Tourism, as you know, is our good sector, is a cash cow. It's very good at bringing in some dollars. And as the minister told you, we are being now highly regarded by international institutions as a tourism destination, and we need to take full advantage of this. So we have invested more money in promotion of tourism next year. Continued investment in ICT development, protecting the budget for human capital development. The keyword here is protecting the budget for which invests in people. As you know, we are in the mode now of fiscal consolidation. we are cutting budgets in government. That's the word people want to use. I usually prefer to use repurposing. We are repurposing the budget from certain areas to other areas. People say, no, you are cutting, say it. Okay, we are cutting budgets. But one budget we have protected jealously is the budget for education, for health, and for water. We had cut some money, we returned it. We said, education, give them even more money. You have heard, they have now 9.8 trillion shillings. And this is to ensure that Ugandans can get good education, health care, as well as water for human consumption. In other jurisdictions, they call it social spending. We are jealously guarding it. We have also enhanced domestic revenue mobilization to collect more revenue to finance our development agenda. Next year, we are going to be more even aggressive in collecting revenue. We are already trying our best, but that best is not enough. There is another word we should use beyond best. You heard His Excellency the President yesterday calling on us to get more revenue. We have the Commissioner here. She will tell you more how we are going to get revenue in a friendly way, but aggressive way, to ensure that we can finance our budget. As you know, in these 2 years of post-COVID, or as we are learning to live with COVID, we haven't introduced new taxes, by and large. The tax regime you are seeing, those measures you are hearing, people reading as if they are new, we are actually just reforming the tax laws to be more friendly to the taxpayer, to equalize the burden and so on. We did it deliberately to avoid putting new taxes to the same taxpayer, because they were falling on the same taxpayer. We said, let's first wait, study very well. I'm telling you, we are studying quietly on which areas we are leaking money. And very soon, the honeymoon of no new taxes will end, but for now, it is effective administration. Now, all of these 11 things I've read as priorities, they are all anchored on continued investment in security, which is the bedrock for socio-economic transformation. We are also putting some money in security. So when you see the budget and you see a security budget, some people don't want to look at security. They say you're wasting money, including our partners. But you know, without security, I can't do all those other things. You will not be able to take children to school. In Karamoja, now with insecurity, children can't go to school when the rustlers have killed their parents. In Uganda here, you don't need lessons on security and stability. Only that most of those things, we take them for granted when they are there. Like right now, when I say security, you say, you are also overdoing it. Okay, let one bullet go off now, somewhere, and you see what will happen here. So security is very critical, and we are not relenting on it. Now, what are the key targets for next budget? We have the following targets. We want the GDP to get back to the growth rate which we target as a country. Our target growth rate is 6%. The president is not happy with us. He feels that 6% is too low. But this is what, for now, we are targeting because of the co-parent factors that we have. But definitely, this is a conversation we are going to have on how to accelerate growth. how to accelerate growth, especially now that most of the fundamentals have been catered for, as I've told you. The other target we have is the size of GDP next financial year. We project it at $55 billion, up from the $49.4 billion this financial year. GDP per capita, we target it at 1,182 US dollars next financial year. Domestic revenue, we have given URA a target of 29.7 trillion, of which 27.4 is tax and 2.3 trillion is non-tax revenue, up from 25.5 trillion this year. That was the target of this year, and they are very near the target to hit it this year. By the way, much as we are having issues with the lower revenue to tax, revenue to GDP ratios, personally, I commend URA for collecting revenue in a very hard time. This COVID period, at least the 2 years I've been in the Treasury, I know URA has been able to give us revenue either to the target or near the target. Last year I gave them the bonus because they collected the revenue to the target. This year they might miss the target, they might miss the bonus by a small margin, unless if they work aggressively hard these remaining weeks, and 2 weeks are still there. URA, you can get to the target. I want to tell you, this financial year, much as we have had all these hardships, the first two quarters, the first half of the year, we by and large run this economy, this government, and all its activities on URA revenue. We didn't borrow money in the first half. Why? Number one, we took a deliberate policy as government to reduce domestic borrowing so that we can support the policy by the central bank. You know, central bank had increased, as you know, the central bank rate to fight off the inflation. As government, we said we should also reduce the appetite for this money, because already when they increase the CBR, it increases the lending rate. Then the government, you go and borrow at 17% on a bond of 20 years. Definitely the private sector will never have money. Mumba will just increase the lending rate to 25 because he's now comfortable with the government borrowing from him. So we stayed away. We only mainly got money for redemption of those other bonds which we are running. And we didn't get NDF, what we call the net domestic financing. We didn't get it for the first half of the year. So I commend URA for that work they are doing, but we are saying it's not enough. You heard the HE was very clear, and we are going to have a very structured conversation on how to address the loopholes. We are also therefore targeting a tax GDP ratio of 14.3% of GDP, up from 13.9% this year. The budget deficit for next year, we are targeting 3.5% of GDP, down from 5.1% this financial year, and further down from 7.4% in 2021-22. This is an area, you know, these things, many average Ugandans don't understand them. When you say fiscal deficit, 5%, what is that? Not very important. It's one of the very hard things to do, to cut budget deficit. We have taken a deliberate pain, helped by, of course, we are being helped. You know, to sustain pain, to consume pain, you need someone to help you, because it's not easy to exert pain on yourself. Our partners, the IMF, the World Bank, they are helping us in implementing fiscal consolidation. And I want to tell you, some people in government are not happy because they are no longer seeing the money they used to see, but it's because we are trying our level best to live within the means. And one of them is this target we are now making. It's a very ambitious target to cut fiscal deficit from 7.4% 2 years ago now to 3.5%, very near to 3%, which is our target we want to achieve in 24-25. The debt to GDP ratio, as the minister told you, is at 48.2. We are targeting to reduce it to 47.9. Now, where are the 52.7 trillion going? I want you to approach this in terms of answering the questions which some people could be asking. Of course, those numbers which are given to you are usually so many, but I'm going to try and summarize where the 52.7 trillion are going. Out of this budget, a total of 17.1 trillion, which is 32.4% of the budget, will be spent on debt repayment across board. Debt repayment. Of this 17.1, 2.6 trillion is for external debt repayment, repaying external debt, 2.6 trillion. 6.1 trillion is for interest payment, and 8.4 trillion is for domestic debt refinancing, what you call debt rollover. Apart from now the 17.1 trillion, we have another 8.3 trillion which is going to be invested in externally funded projects. Externally funded projects. We call it project financing. Of these, 3 trillion is from grants. They have just given us free money. Of course, with certain conditions. Condition number one, some of this money spend it in the districts which host refugees. That's one condition. So those districts where there are refugees, there is some good amount of money for health centers, for roads, for schools, and so on. We have a total of 3 trillion in grants. Good amount of money. Then the other 5.3 trillion is for borrowing. We are borrowing it. But a big chunk of it, the good news is, we are borrowing it from concessional source. It's mainly World Bank money, giving us this money, and other concessional funders, ADB, Islamic Development Bank, and so on. I want to tell you, in the project area, we have reduced the appetite for commercial. We don't want commercial. Another 1.5 trillion will be paid to Bank of Uganda to clear outstanding claims. I am making full accountability of the 52 trillion so that you understand it. It's going to take 1.5 trillion, this money here, to clear outstanding claims from them. Now, the rest of the budget, and that is, if you were calculating, 25.8 trillion this is 49% of the budget, is going to be spent on the following. Wages and salaries, 7.3 trillion. Statutory costs, these are pension, gratuity, NSSF, 717 billion. Capital expenditure, these are multi-year commitments, multi-year projects funded by government. Those small schools you see in the villages, the health facilities, we are going to spend 5.8 trillion. Another 3.35 trillion is for fixed costs, and these include utilities. Over 125 billion is to pay utilities, water, electricity bills. You remember the other week, National Water switched off some facilities of government which were not budgeting for utilities, simply because we are government and the National Water is also government. You say, why should I pay another government entity? And you don't budget. Those accounting officers who don't pay for utilities are going to lose their jobs. Going forward, they must budget and pay, and the money is here. Rent, ICT, these ICT systems we use in government, they are taking 269 billion. Allowances, these are statutory allowances that we defined in the Constitution. The Chief Justice, the members of Parliament, all of the judges, all of the big people and the small people in government who have statutory allowances. They are there, 752 billion. Fuel, 254 billion. And then we capitalize our Uganda Airlines to fly, Emioga, our UDB, the other man I've been reading here. They are all here under fixed costs. Those are fixed costs. Whether government is running or not, you must pay them. Whether you decide to sack all people in government, you must pay the rent, unless if you close that office, and so on. Then we have policy commitments. These are policy commitments of government. They are taking 3.34 trillion. PDM, road maintenance, we give Uganda Road Fund 461 billion to maintain roads. Now we have added 176 billion so that even districts can maintain the roads. Each district is going to get 1 billion to grade, put maram, and compact those small roads we have in our villages. We want them motorable. Local government grants, NMS, to buy medicine for Ugandans. It is taking 431 billion. We are going to do a national census this coming financial year in August. We have given them here partial 177 billion. They need another 160 something billion, which we are going to provide them. URA to collect our revenue. We give them some little money, 130 something billion, so that they can be able to go and collect the money that we use, and so on and so forth. So those are policy commitments of government. We have also expenditure on security across board, Ministry of Defense, police, prisons, the security organizations. They are taking about 2.5 trillion, all of them. And then we have other expenditures which take about 2.8 trillion, which include operational costs of MDS, payment of domestic arrears. Mumba wants me to put more money, local revenue, and Bank of Uganda recapitalization, and so on. All of those, they are here. So This national budget you have, ladies and gentlemen, that's how the money is spent. Full accountability, it's open book. Uganda has one of the most transparent budgets. We put it there on the website. Then we come to every conference room and we explain it, including declaring money of which we spend on security. In many other jurisdictions, they don't do that. We do that to ensure that you have an informed conversation. And we stop conversations based on maybe emotions and so on. My policy is put the budget to the table, let Ugandans who are the owners of the budget have an informed conversation. Now, I want to conclude with the risks, because you called me here to talk about risks, vulnerabilities, and uncertainties. Next financial year, but also I'm going to talk about what government is doing to mitigate these risks. The first one is lower than expected tax revenue. Is a risk that we must manage. As I've already told you, we are targeting to collect only about 14.3% of GDP. This is very low. The reason is unknown. We have been debating them. The first major reason, Ugandan economy is structured in such a way that it is very difficult to tax. That's the first major reason. Some people talk as if you are from abroad. Uganda is very difficult to tax. Most people are farmers. And the farmers are the policy makers. They don't want to tax themselves. In parliament, in government, everywhere. Whenever you say, because now agriculture is contributing 23% of GDP. It has even now increased because of this huge investment in agriculture. Now it is going to 25.6% of GDP. I saw the UBOS numbers. But agriculture is paying less than 1% of the tax. That's why you have low tax revenue. If we want more tax revenue, we must have a candid conversation. How do we start to tax agriculture, commercial agriculture? I've told you we are investing more money there. 2.7 trillion is going into those areas, but it's not paying tax. People are selling trees in the forest there for 500 million. They go home with the money. They sell from the forest. They count there. Then they go home. People are selling livestock. You just go and stand on your stick and you say, take those ones. They count the money. They go home. We must change the conversation if we are serious on tax revenue. That's number one. We have also the informal businesses here. Those ones we are working on them. We are working on them on how first to support them to grow, to formalize. That's the first major thing we need to do. So we are working in a program with the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, URSB, with the URA, with the local government, with the also these urban authorities, KCCA, and others, first, to ensure that we formalize all Ugandans. All Ugandans who are doing business should be registered and then supported in a more organized way to make money. But as they make money, they should also be able to pay tax. The good thing with the tax, with government never taxes someone who doesn't make money. We tax you when you have made some money. So that's another area we must address. Then we have also leakage, clear leakage in the tax system. People under-declaring, people falsifying documents. In the past, we used to have another problem of tax godfathers. Those ones, thank God, they are no longer there. I want to tell you now, you can't avoid tax by just getting a tax godfather. It's not there in Uganda. Someone who helps you not to pay tax. Those ones are not there. But now there are those leakages because of the sophistication of certain sectors. You'll find some sectors like telecommunication, like those who are in a sophisticated manufacturing, some areas, those who are in mining, and some other areas where our auditors, the tax auditors, are not well conversant. We are suspecting that they are under-declaring, and we are investigating this. We are getting capabilities from outside to help us. And we get those under-declarations out. We suspect there is huge leakage in VAT. Estimates are putting it at about 5 trillion shillings. We are losing it just in unpaid and declared VAT. And these are now some of the areas we are going to be aggressive. When I say the aggressiveness, I mean those areas, so that we can get revenue. We are also rationalizing tax exemptions. It's another area where we have had risk. Tax exemptions, we want to improve their effectiveness, but also to increase revenue. As you know, it's government policy. Most of our exemptions are mainstreamed in our tax laws and investment policy. But some of them are what we call those which are given on executive grace. We are working out a criteria so that we can guide on who should get an exemption, and when they get them, how do they account? But also improving on the monitoring of these exemptions. If you have promised us that when we exempt you to import a machine, to set up a facility, you'll be able to employ 20 people. Are you employing 20 people? How are you paying them? You said you're going to use locally sourced raw materials. Are you using locally sourced raw materials? That monitoring. We are also going to put sunset clauses now in our tax exemption documents. These exemptions are not perpetual. And also, when you don't perform, you can lose them. That's what we are saying here. Please note this. We are not stopping as government tax exemptions. We are not stopping them. We are rationalizing them. Everywhere in the world, they offer investors tax exemptions. Because someone who's investing their capital in your country, they need certain incentives when the business is still young. To imagine someone is bringing $50 million to invest in agro something, in a guru. You need really to facilitate them. That's the whole essence of these exemptions. But as we facilitate them, we want to ensure that they're actually doing that. The second major area of concern we are having next year is the rising public debt. It is a risk which we want to mitigate. Although our public debt is still below regional peers, like Rwanda, Kenya, and others, our public debt as a percentage of GDP has risen sharply in the past decade, from 15% in 2009-10 to 48.4% today. An increasing share of the budget is now being spent on debt service, as I've shown you, 17 trillion. The proportion of revenues spent on debt repayment has increased from 22% in 2018 to 34% in 2023. Additionally, Bank of Uganda's foreign exchange reserves have been recently strained by the high cost of servicing the large amount of external debt, although they are still adequate and steadily reaccumulating. We don't want our reserves to go below the thresholds required of a country to be safe. Dr. Mugume is here, will tell you why. He needs 4.5 months of import cover in reserves. That reserve, international reserve held in foreign currency, specifically dollars, is a weapon for him. When he doesn't have it, and some guys get to know that he doesn't have it, they start to misbehave, to speculate on us. When he has it, he burns their fingers. That's why we want to protect it jealously. So that's why the minister told you it's now a strategy to reduce borrowing. We have cut domestic borrowing by 3 trillion this coming year. We are not going to pick 3 trillion from Mumba. Mumba, we are sorry. We are cutting it so that we can be able to manage what I've been talking about. Domestic actually debt, much as it is quite more convenient, is very expensive. Now it is lower than external debt in principle, but they are the ones which take a higher proportion of this interest payment. The other uncertainty we are having is the unpredictable weather patterns. Unpredictable weather patterns. As you know, our economy is still predominantly agrarian, with the farmers relying on rainfall. Rainfall. So we are susceptible to drought and floods, which may undermine agriculture activity and lead to food insecurity, lead to inflation and low growth. Dr. Mugume will tell you the main driver of our inflation here is food. Food. Whenever Ugandans have food, inflation is low because everybody is eating. Whenever the food gets out, prices rise. Now, we are mitigating this by stepping up investment in irrigation. That's why I talked about the priority of solar-powered irrigation. All of you who are farmers, please, government has now brought several projects next year to support you to set up solar-powered irrigation systems on your gardens and irrigate those crops throughout the year. The other vulnerability we are having is on regional and global geopolitical tensions. They are still ongoing. As you know, the Russia-Ukraine war is still on, but now we have also regional. Sudan is at war, as you know. These are countries that are our neighbors. These would distort supply chains, affect trade, and cause or worsen balance of payments deficits. The other one is the persistent weak global growth and lower commodity prices. These could constrain export earnings and widen the current account deficit. The global economy is still weak, but recovering. And as you know, Uganda, we are masters of managing exogenous shocks. If you remember last year, as we were ending there, Ugandans were angry. Whenever you could stand somewhere to talk to them, Ugandans were, no, do something. People wanted us to give subsidies. People wanted us to control prices. People wanted us to cut taxes. We said, no, the best policy is actually to do nothing for now, because these are beyond your control. When you subsidize a good, who's the supplier? You are not in control. You are actually subsidizing the supplier. Because at the end of the day, you will find that they are going to leak your money. And we said it, and people were not listening. In our neighborhood, they are finding it difficult to heal from those mistakes. I am in contact with my colleagues in the region, Secretary of the Treasury. We sit on the same table in Arusha, wherever. Guys are in very bad shape. The bills, like subsidies is a conduit of corruption. You subsidize the big guys. They take your money as government, but it doesn't go to the person you intend to help. So these ones we shall manage. There are also risks of imported inflation still on, due to the ongoing uncertainty and evolving risk in the global economy, which would lead to slower than expected disinflation. As we are working hard, the central bank, they told you how it has worked so hard. Of course, we are supporting them fully to fight the inflation, but now they are not in charge of this imported inflation. We hope that it does not spoil our good work that we are doing. And we are not only relying on hope and God. We have put in place, as I've told you, mechanisms of managing these challenges, including supporting the private sector. We have also implementation failure risk. Implementation failure. Our implementation is being failed by lack of goal consensus, among other factors. And you know, when you lack a goal consensus, you will have a problem called policy incoherence. You will have a problem of budget games, what economists call budget games. Everybody looking for a bigger budget, no matter the priority list. You are going to have also a chaotic political administrative interface when you don't have policy coherence. When I was in Chankwanzi the other week, when our leaders were in Chankwanzi, I requested our leaders, the cabinet ministers, the members of parliament, who were mainly the ones there, and the party leaders, please, as leaders, as policy makers of this country, agree on the priorities. And once you agree on these priorities, communicate them effectively. And number two, agree on in which way should we grow this economy. Because there are so many proposals and debates. Countries don't debate growth strategy. Once you have debated it and agreed, and you said this is the budget strategy, then all people must rally behind it. You must have goal consensus. It's the first major step in implementation, successful implementation. So the frontline implementers need clear political guidance to stop budget games and rally towards agreed upon goal. I'm one of the happiest citizens now. You know, Sarah found me seated there and said, "You look relaxed, what's happening?" It's because my head of state has defined clearly what should be done by everybody. I am now very clear. I'm now waiting for anyone who is doing the other. Goal consensus is clear. If there are still people who want to debate, let them come in these seminars, we debate. But when we go back to work, serious work, we should all be doing the same thing. When we say we are going to industrialize, let's do it seriously. Resources should go there. The monitors should monitor. The taxman should collect the tax, and we all move in one direction. If it is PDM, and we have gotten the 1.1 trillion, let those who are supposed to ensure that people get it from the banks and use it for production do that. If they can't, please, there are so many Ugandans who can do these things. And that clarity is what is giving me now, Sarah. That's why you see I'm okay. Thank you. The other one is poor project performance. Poor project performance is still a risk. This is not implementation failure per se, but implementing poorly. Very good projects. We are going to review the entire project portfolio with a view to stopping the poorly performing ones. So if there is any government implementer presiding over a project that is not performing, that project is going to be stopped and gotten out of the public investment plan. And now, if that is to happen, then really, what justification will that person have to remain in that job as an accounting officer if you have failed to implement a good project? We have gone, designed the projects, we have borrowed the money from the World Bank. These things we have been hearing right of way is the reason why projects are not implemented. Those things are not the real factors. We have discovered the factors as we are reviewing, and we are going to start to move project by project. We are beginning next week. The review is going to happen at the project site, not in offices. We are going to projects. People who failed to implement projects, we are no longer going to borrow money, sit with the borrower, we pay interest, we are paying commitment fees, and some fellows are just around enjoying themselves. You know, some people also, there was a moral hazard. They don't want projects to perform. They don't want them to end. Because you have a Land Cruiser, you have some small allowance, you keep on a project for 10 years, which was supposed to be for 3 years. We're really going to ensure that this stops. So those MDAs that have failed to complete projects will not receive new funds until they exit the existing portfolio. The last one is the aftermath of the conversations we've been having lately on AHA. You know AHA? Those who know, you know AHA. Now, there were people who had the fears that AHA will cause us problems. I want to assure you that we are engaging our partners very well. And His Excellency the President has explained to those who want to listen the kind of AHA he signed, and if there is any other AHA, that one should be reviewed. And therefore, there is no need to worry whatsoever about AHA. Going forward, as I conclude, we have learned the following as government. We are learning to live within our means in a hard way. We have started to tame budget incrementalism. These days, the winners in the budget are gaining by taking from losers, rather than claiming incremental resources. We have started to make the budget redistributive. We are learning to promise in the plans what we can pay for in the budget. That's why we revised the NDP 3. So dear Ugandans who are quoting NDP 3, please quote the medium-term reviewed NDP 3. The other one which we started with has changed. I hear people, core projects of NDP have not been implemented. We are now at 17% implementation. NDP has also changed. The appetite has reduced because we must fit in the reality that we have today, post-COVID. That's why we have been able to reduce our fiscal deficit, and going forward, we are going to get it into the target. Number two, we have started to make the budget less accommodative. We are on track to restoring fiscal discipline and with it budget credibility. Supplementary budgets have reduced and will be controlled further going forward until they fit in the constitutional criteria. Supplementaries, I've told my accounting officers, beginning with my colleagues, the permanent secretaries, supplementary budgets were put in the law for only those occasions which were unforeseeable and unavoidable. For example, we have now approved the budget. If a catastrophe occurs and a bridge Katonga is swept, people can't cross to go to Mbarara to fetch the milk and the bananas. That's when the supplementary comes. We take a supplementary to restore that bridge, but not to bring me a supplementary to buy cars. A supplementary, we have a building which is not finished. Give me a supplementary to finish a building. Those things is indiscipline. And I told my accounting officers that some took it for granted. They were writing letters. I think they were used to that history of writing letters even when a circular has been written. We are going to review as the year ends. I have a drawer full of papers which people used to write. And we are going now to ask those accounting officers to really show us why they should continue being accounting officers when they go against the circular of the state and they are asking for things which are not acceptable. So we are controlling those supplementaries, and if the political economy also improves very well, we shall be okay with these supplementaries. What do I mean by political economy? Some of these supplementaries are caused by our legislators. And I told them recently in Chankwan's, you have prepared a budget with government obligations. Government has obligations you must pay for. For example, we have an obligation called deemed energy. We built dams, with the private sector people. In the agreement, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Attorney General and the Minister of Finance appended the signatures that we are going to buy this power at this tariff. If we don't, we pay you until we transmit this power to the consumer. Now, some of those dams were completed. We are paying some deemed energy. But now you take the budget and Parliament cuts out that money and distributes it around. It's a government obligation. It has to have a first call on the budget. So when you see us issuing those supplementaries, sometimes it's part of this problem. About 1.4 trillion of this current budget has a supplementary which was caused by appropriation distortion. This one I need to tell you openly. And we need to also work on that. As I told you, government has also learned that it can reduce borrowing, particularly domestic borrowing, and we don't die. We have tried it. Of course, it is painful. People expect money at a certain time, but sometimes we need to learn, as I told you, to live within our means. So this is a lesson we are learning and carrying forward. We have also learned that we can mobilize more revenues without levying new taxes or rates whose burden tends to fall on the same taxpayers, especially if they are not well studied. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted also to inform you that we have successfully concluded the 4th review of our ECF program, Extended Credit Facility Program with the IMF. Cumulatively, the IMF has disbursed an equivalent of $625 million out of the $1 billion that they gave us for supporting us out of COVID. We have carried out several reforms under this program, focused on prudent fiscal and monetary policies, enhanced social spending, improved revenue collection, safeguarding a resilient financial sector, and also anti-corruption measures. These days and going forward, stealing government money and you get away with it, you wait, you are going to see. You are going to see what is going to happen in this country going forward. Just wait. In conclusion, therefore, the fiscal outlook for Uganda remains positive. I wanted to assure you of this. The economy has remained resilient despite facing a series of shocks. It is now on a steady recovery path. Government is committed to increasing revenue collection to support economic growth without excessive borrowing. The ongoing oil and gas activities have already started to boost the recovery and transformation of this economy. The oil companies are making a $6.75 billion, that is 25 trillion shillings, investment in 4 years to the first oil. That is up to 2025. This year alone, they have invested $2.35 billion. In the next 25 years, we are projected to earn between $25 billion to $50 billion after netting off the investment cost. We add this to the jobs and the various expanded opportunities for revenue collection, the multiplier effect it is causing. We are saying, so far, we are managing this journey very well. The past 3 years have been quite hard for a median global citizen, let alone a typical Ugandan, but I want to assure you that the future looks bright. As you discuss the uncertainties, please, the future looks very bright. Just support our reforms, embrace the numerous opportunities that the government is creating. The goal is to make the economy work for everyone. A farmer, a trader, a street vendor, a worker, a journalist, like this one here, an industrialist, a banker, a professional service provider, a civil servant, a medical personnel, a security personnel, a younger guy earning from gigs, every woman and man, the elderly, a politician, and you and I, we are all covered in this budget. And it has something for all of us. We just need to look it out. Let us not just be so negative on a very good trajectory we are having. Thank you very much.
Thank you, PSST. Another round of applause, please. Yes, I think we have gotten now good context that should transition us into especially the panel discussion when it starts. So at this moment, without any further ado, let me invite, we have a presentation from the chief economist, Absa Group, is online, she is online. So I'm going to ask my transmission people to loop her in, and then we get to hear from her. Thank you.
Right. Please let me know when you're ready. Oh, all right. There was a bit of feedback. I can hear myself. Okay, but it seems fine now. All right. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, as well as our esteemed speakers. Thanks for joining us today as we unpack various aspects of the budget. As introduced, I'm Mpumulo Piane. I'm an economist at Absa, covering sub-Saharan Africa research, so I'm very grateful for having me today. I'm going to take you through the macroeconomic backdrop, particularly focusing on the global macroeconomic backdrop, which has informed our view in terms of how we see the Uganda economy, as well as concerns around debt vulnerability sort of planning out. The key themes I'm going to touch on today are around the global economy, easing commodity prices, but still stick inflation, what that means for monetary policy, as well as some of the issues around debt sustainability, concerns across the region, and FX pressures. I think to just put, the discussion around global growth into context, the global economy has, over the past couple of years, experienced a number of shocks over a very short period of time. In 2020, we had the COVID pandemic. In 2022, it was the Russia-Ukraine war, which led to a significant increase in commodity prices and rising inflationary pressures, which was then followed by synchronized monetary policy tightening, which really affected consumers and households at large. And as a result, global growth is expected to slow further for the second consecutive year this year, rising only by about 2.8% in 2023 from about 3.4% in 2022. And to just put into context the impact of the shocks that we have experienced, over a 5-year period, global growth is expected to converge to about 3%. In 2011, longer-term growth was expected at about 4.6%. So we've really seen quite significant scarring from both the COVID pandemic as well as the Russia-Ukraine war. The slowdown in economic activity is expected to be a lot more pronounced in advanced economies, given that inflation remains relatively sticky and further tightening is expected there. In the broader SSA region, growth is expected to slow, but to a lesser extent, in part supported by various developments in the energy sector across the region, and to a lesser extent, aggressive monetary policy tightening. I think positively, though, we do see that commodity prices are softening. They've come off quite significantly from the 2022 peaks, but they remain higher relative to the levels where they were in 2019. What this means essentially is that global inflation is moderating, but at a much slower pace. So we're likely to see inflation revert back to target much later than we initially anticipated. And for central banks, really what this means is that global interest rates are likely to remain higher for longer. So while inflation is easing, we're not yet talking about cutting interest rates. I think a key concern which has come up, and this is because what high interest rates have done is that they've increased debt service cost quite significantly. They've also led to capital flight out of your emerging markets and frontier economies into safe haven assets. So governments are then faced with high debt service costs and increased difficulty in refinancing the debt that is becoming due. And as a result, we're seeing multilaterals step up their support. Multilaterals, I'm talking about the IMF, the World Bank, the AFDB, and various other institutions. We've seen them step up support to try and make sure that countries are at least able to still expand their expenditure to ensure that the most vulnerable in society, continue to be protected. And then I think what this means for Uganda is that, we are entering a new fiscal year faced with a very challenging macroeconomic backdrop. But despite this challenging macroeconomic backdrop, Uganda has managed to post quite strong, robust post-pandemic recovery, in part due to various developments that we're seeing in the energy sector, government spending, as well as external demand from neighboring countries, given that they themselves have posted solid post-pandemic growth rates. Looking forward, particularly for 2023, while we do expect growth is likely to slow given the challenging global macroeconomic backdrop, we do expect that growth is going to remain above the pre-pandemic average. I've touched a bit on this, that developments in the oil sector have supported Uganda's recovery, and we expect that going forward, we're likely going to see further support given the investments that are going into the sector. And to just put this into context is that government is not only targeting oil production, but they have other various projects also aimed at improving the export base, like the oil pipeline, as well as the refinery, which is also expected to service the broader region. If we look at near-term economic indicators, they're also supportive of our view that growth is likely to remain robust in the near term, supporting private sector expansion. Inflation is also another positive story for Uganda. We see that inflation has decelerated quite significantly, printing at about 6.2% in May, and this is down from 8.0% the prior month. This has in part being attributed to moderating global commodity prices, but also an improvement in weather conditions. And as a result, we've seen inflation moderate quite significantly. However, even with this improved trajectory that we're seeing in inflation, the MPC at its recent meeting did warn that the fight against inflation is not over yet. And our expectation is that the central bank is likely going to keep the policy rate unchanged to the end of the year to ensure that inflation is sustainably anchored below target. However, given the improvement in the inflation outlook that we've seen and the positive surprises that we've seen really from the inflation prints, if we do see a much more pronounced deceleration in inflation, the central bank could be in a position to cut the policy rate as early as the fourth quarter of this year. And then I think on the budget, the key takeaway is that fiscal consolidation is likely to remain a key focal point for government, particularly amidst debt sustainability concerns. And from our side, given that we're less upbeat around the growth outlook compared to government, we do see a much more gradual pace of adjustment in the deficit. What that means is that the debt to GDP trajectory is likely going to continue increasing before it declines in the outer year and stabilizing thereafter. The key budget risks to just keep in mind is that if we do see fiscal slippage, government is going to have to guard against fiscal slippage, which could be from a form of lower than expected tax revenue collections or unexpected expenditure. Government will have to guard against that because it could lead to sovereign rating downgrades, which then increases debt service costs, which would then eat into much needed infrastructure as well as social spending. I think the other key global risk also is even tighter financing conditions. So if we were to see a resurgence in commodity prices with central banks in advanced economies in particular increasing interest rates even further, that coupled with currency weakness could significantly increase significantly increase debt service payments as well as lead to dried up funding. So government is going to have to guard against those risks. Positively, I think positively what we're seeing in Uganda is that given the solid macroeconomic fundamentals, the shilling has traded relatively stable relative to other currencies in the region, especially where we're seeing concerns around those countries' debt sustainability. So this has really been a positive for Uganda because we haven't seen quite a significant depreciation in the currency as well as a significant or increase in external debt service payments. So to conclude my presentation, sorry for flying through that, but to conclude my presentation really, I think, and to just take you through some of the key themes which we discussed is around slowing global growth. What does that mean for government if growth were to slow much more than we currently expect due to further fragmentation in geopolitics or further geopolitical tensions, that could definitely affect external demand and see Uganda growth slow much more than we anticipated. Slower growth would mean lower revenue collections and lead to fiscal slippage. So that's some of the things that government is going to have to plan against. Commodity prices are easing, but inflation remains sticky and is unlikely going to revert back to target earlier as we anticipated earlier. What this means is that interest rates are likely to stay higher for longer to firmly re-anchor inflation expectations. There's increased fiscal and debt sustainability concerns around the region, and with with Uganda's debt expected to increase overall over the next coming years before it stabilizes in the outer year. Government is also going to have to keep this in mind to say that if we do see fiscal slippage, how do we protect the fiscal stance to ensure that there is no debt, there isn't an increase in debt sustainability, which could lead to rating downgrades and thereby currency weakness as well as high debt service cost, which would in turn also put pressure on the currency. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation and hand back to the MC.
Thank you very much. I think that gives us a global context and locates us where we are as a country, Uganda. So I know time is not our best ally at the moment. Just one presentation, and then we go into the panel discussion. That's where we're going to pick your mind on a number of these issues that are rising. So I'm going to invite the presenter from Deloitte to come and give us a presentation. Let's try to keep it as brief as we can. Thank you very much. A round of applause as it comes to the podium. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Everything has been said by the PS, and he has presented to us what has been in the budget. I'm going to be sharing with you some data points which will form the basis of our discussion this morning. I think I might need somebody from the tech side to assist me here. Can I have the Deloitte presentation, please? All right. We've already heard about a lot from the macroeconomic perspective. Inflation at 7.2% by the end of the year, the depreciation of the Ugandan shillings and where our debt is. I'll try and be fast since some of these had already been highlighted. But if you look at those movements, our contribution to GDP, as you can see, largely driven by household incomes. And I think the PSST had highlighted how much we need to do from bringing those household incomes within our tax regime. When you look at the region, that's how we compare with the region. Over the time, as you can see, around 2020, we did have COVID, which affected some of our neighbors. And as you can see, Tanzania stood firm, given the fact that they never locked down their economy. But you can see our growth trajectory is on a positive side, looking at 2022 versus 2023. In terms of our import and export trends, you can see our gap between the exports and imports is widening, and I think that's what the PS was talking about, to find ways of how we can bridge that gap. Our biggest imports, as you can see, are petroleum products, but look at the bottom part, the motor vehicles. Probably the two are interrelated. And then when you look at our exports, our main export is gold and gold compounds, followed by coffee, fish, and fish products. And when it comes to the people that we are trading with, Kenya being our biggest trading partner, South Sudan, and then DRC. Some of the proposed initiatives, as the PS has highlighted, is really access to use of water for agricultural production, doing a lot around post-harvest and storage and agricultural mechanization, and that's why there was a lot of emphasis around agribusiness. Let us look at the human trends. You might recall the minister said that 23 million of employable Ugandans are currently employed, but the employment population ratio currently stands at 43%, having grown from 39, and I think the PS had alluded to that. But when you see where most of our people are employed, it's largely in agriculture, again an area that the PS was highlighting as an area we need to emphasize and bring within our tax regime. But let's look at the SMEs. These people make 80% of our GDP. But when you look at the manufactured output out of SMEs, it's only 20%. And I'm happy the PS said a lot of emphasis is being put on this particular sector. And I know the categorization of SMEs might vary, but this categorization is what is provided by the Ministry of Trade. But look at where these SMEs are concentrated, mainly in Central. And the other pie chart clearly shows the SME distribution in terms of their age. The largest number being between 1 to 10%. But then what happens? When you look at the SMEs that are exceeding 10 years to 20 years, that number shrinks. Probably those initiatives around the stimulus that the PS was highlighting will be able to solve that problem, and we get the biggest chunk sustaining businesses up to 15 to 20 years. And look at that last graph, which is around the age distribution of the business owners. At 30 to 50, that's the biggest chunk, but looks like we are retiring early from our businesses when you look at the distribution of the 50 years and above. So the PS has highlighted a lot of stimulus packages that have been put forward to help businesses come out of the challenges they had out of COVID-19. But when you look at where the money is distributed, a lot of it is UDB. He highlighted how a lot of money has been channeled through UDC and a Myoga business, a Myoga program under Uganda Manufacturers, Uganda Microfinance Support Center. And he highlighted how people are utilizing this money, but you can see that the biggest chunk again is from Kampala, then followed by Northern, the wider Central region, Western and Eastern in that order. Some of the challenges that are dogging obviously this program are really around the initiatives that the PS has highlighted, preparing these SMEs to be able to absorb the financing, all the resourcing that has been provided. Let me just rush through this because the PS has highlighted quite a lot around this, so no need to really dwell a lot around it. But let's look at the budget funding. He highlighted that a lot of it, the emphasis is around domestic revenue, domestic refinancing, and obviously you can see how the external financing is decreasing, which I think for us is a positive direction that we are heading. That slide shows our main partners, our main donor partners. We've got the bilateral, and our main bilateral partner there is the US, the International Financial Institution, the World Bank, and the under the multilateral ones, Global Fund. The PS also highlighted a lot of initiatives around infrastructure, and that's how this has been financed, largely by government of Uganda, then various loans from international financial institutions, and our partners from China. I won't dwell a lot around debt. A lot has been spoken about that, but let's also look at how this has been panning out. As highlighted from 2009 to 2022, you can see how the debt has been growing and how it is distributed between domestic and external debt. In terms of the distribution of external debt by creditor category, you can see the biggest chunk being multilateral creditors, and at the lower bottom, our commercial banking partners in the country. When you look at that slide, it's clearly showing how government is financing quite a lot around the development plan implementation versus the other areas that are going to be externally financed in terms of our budget. In terms of our debt stock by instrument, you can see largely the treasury bonds come up, and with a small chunk coming out of treasury bills. Who are these people who are giving government money? That graph shows that largely we've got the pension and provident funds, commercial banks, some offshore investments, and others. The PS has highlighted payments that a lot of emphasis around payment of domestic areas. I know Mr. Mumba also had highlighted that. But if you look at what was budgeted for to be paid by March 2023 was 568, and by end of March, over 700 billion had been paid. Allow me to take you through some of the tax measures. When you look at that bar, it shows you the revenue projection versus the corrections. The blue is the projections and how the collections have panned throughout. And this comes to what the PS was talking to us earlier. When you look at that, particular graph, it clearly shows how much money is, how it is distributed, and the largest being our source of collection being taxes on international trade, the other being domestic taxes, direct domestic taxes, where my sister Sal falls, and I believe when she comes forward, she will be telling us more on some of the initiatives that they are undertaking to collect more revenues. But when you look at the budgeted amount, the budget for this year versus where we are projected to land by end of June, it clearly shows that, you know, a lot of work needs to be done, as the PS has highlighted earlier in his presentation. But let us look at the revenue corrections under domestic, or rather under direct tax. The biggest chunk of the taxpayers, all the tax revenue, comes out of pay as you earn. But look at the rental income tax. How many of us here rent premises for our businesses and even for our own accommodation? If you look at the rental, the taxes being raised out of rental tax, I think it is one of the lowest. So I think a lot of effort here will need to be done to see how much money can be generated or collected out of rental income tax. On the indirect tax, which each one of us in here pays, directly or indirectly, you can see the biggest correction is from VAT and followed by excise duty. Looking at the sectors that contribute taxes, you can really see that wholesalers and retail traders and motor vehicles are contributing quite a lot, a bit of it coming out of manufacturing too, and financial services. And things like agriculture and the rest fall under the others. From that table, I want you to look at how much revenue in taxes is being collected from the insurance sector, almost close to, actually negligible, 0%. When you look at agriculture, about 1%, and real estate, 2%. What can we do for us to be able to generate more taxes out of those particular sectors? Last but not least, the World Bank says that for any country to be efficient in as far as tax to revenue, rather tax to GDP ratio is concerned, countries need to be collecting around 15%. But you've heard from the PS, we are likely to land at 13.4 by in this coming year, which means that we are on the right trajectory towards the recommended ratio. With those few numbers, I believe it sets a scene for us so that our discussants this morning can be able to share more insights based on the numbers that we have. I would like to thank you, and I wish you good deliberations.
Thank you, Norbert. Another round of applause for Norbert. Norbert is the country lead for Deloitte and a key partner for this engagement that we have here today. Quite some interesting facts he reveals as we go into the panel discussion. I was taken aback when he mentioned that, of course, the fact that we all know very well that 80% of our GDP is SME dominated, but only 20% actually into manufacturing or value addition for that matter. Now that speaks a lot to almost all sectors and players that are represented here today. And without preempting what is going to be discussed at the panel, by the panel, at this moment, let me invite the panel members for any questions and comments. Please, they are the people who are going to help us understand this a lot better, and then the responses. So without any further ado, let me invite the panel members. We have Michael Segawa, Executive Director and CFO, Absa. Please take your seat. We have Ms. Sarah Chelengat, the Commissioner, Domestic Tax, Uganda Revenue Authority. Then we have Petronella Namubiru, Associate Director, Tax and Legal, Deloitte, Uganda. We have the PSST. But I think really when you look at the presentation he gave us, it was quite detailed, and I need to thank the PSST because all these forums and discussions we've had, as NTV has always given us time. He's a very, very busy man, so giving us the time he has, we really appreciate that. Then we have the private sector represented by Uma, a Uganda Manufacturers Association representative around. Please come to. So at this moment, I'm going to hand over to our moderator for that session, and that is Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Dr. Fred. Let's give our panelists a round of applause as prepare to take us through. So I would like to recognize, as Dr. Muhumuza takes his seat, the presence of the World Bank in the house. Rachel, thank you for coming. All right, over to you, Fred.
Good morning, everybody. I know we always want to avoid a vacuum, so there is a seat there for the Director Research, Executive Director Research at the Bank of Uganda. Dr. Adam Mugume, please. That seat is for you. We negotiated with the PSST that since part of the risks the PSST is facing are the reserves, we need to discuss it from the floor. PSST, I must appreciate everything you have said, more so by relieving us of the burden of identification of the risks. You're very much aware of them, so that solves the conversation we came to have here, and they have really been ably put out there. And also the issue of the uncertainties and some of the risks in terms of project implementation. There is a meeting we're supposed to share with you, but I'm glad you have reined it in your conversation when you talked about repurposing. There are certain words that people don't want to hear. One of the other words is actually going to be restructuring. And restructuring was not just about government agencies, but more of public expenditure. So the word was RAPEX, restructuring of agencies and public expenditure. Now, when you walk into the public expenditure restructuring, you are actually talking about restructuring the entire government. And that should be a conversation we want to continue with in this conversation. So I want to invite the panel and thank everybody who is here. I want to really start off with a 1 or 2 minute, maybe 2 or 3 minutes for each of the panel members to give us their take on where we are so far. You saw the conversation, you've had the conversation, you saw the topic we invited you on. We really want you to have a blank check. It is dangerous to give a blank check to people, but the managing director for Absa is here. He will receive whatever you write on that check, and then he will decide what to do with the check. So let me begin with Chelengat. What have you picked out of this conversation so far that you really don't want us to miss out as we go back? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Doctor. Good morning to all of you. And thank you so much. I represent the sector that will be looking for the tax revenue as part of the contribution of this budget. You note that domestic tax revenue will be 29.7 trillion, and that will be the mandate of the Uganda Revenue Authority. We look forward to getting this money, and we appreciate the way the budget is very balanced, because it is going to benefit each and every Ugandan. Every Ugandan will participate in this budget, and we also expect that as we widen the tax base, every Ugandan will be contributing their fair share of tax into this budget. So we are hopeful to deliver this budget together with the support of all Ugandans in their call for patriotism to be part of this budget. Let us look into paying a fair share of tax. When you consume, when you buy that cooking oil, when you buy that soap, you are going to pay some indirect tax to government. When you work so hard and do that trade, there is some profit that government will look into, you paying that fair share into government. So this budget is for all of us, and we just need to embrace and deliver it. Thank you so much. Doctor.
Thank you for that opening remark. I think the conversation is going on consumption. How do people get the incomes? Without the incomes, they cannot consume. So the income side is also going to be very critical. especially for an economy that we all know people are hiding. As he said, people are transacting in forests. But eventually they will come to buy fuel to drive their car. So there are those kinds of issues, but I don't want to preempt. We are still on the blank check. Absa.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think on my side, it's a cautiously optimistic budget. There are not so many changes. There are no changes in taxes. And for me, the remarks by the president surprised me. Quite angry at my colleague on my side. And I was a bit perplexed, but he also challenged us. When you hear the statistics today that we are doing so much agriculture, and yet it's less than 1%, that's a big challenge for all of us. The other statistic that came through was the fact that we have a trade surplus with the East African countries. And for me, that was a call on us to work hard to try and ensure that we increase this surplus. But I think from a banking perspective, I'll emphasize the whole aspect of arrears. The fact that we may see some struggles from our clients, the customers. We need to devise ways of supporting them, even as they take longer to get paid. Thank you.
PSST, it looks like the biggest area you paid was to BOU. Thank God he hasn't come in. Patronella is standing in between that statement and BOU. You don't have to answer it. You have a blank check. Patronella, please.
Thank you very much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. I do agree. For me, this does look like an optimistic budget. I think there's, movement in the right direction. Financing is a big issue for a lot of businesses, and there seems to be movement in that direction to provide funding. But again, like my colleague Absa, I will be cautiously optimistic, and it does come back to implementation. It comes down to how easy it is for the people who are targeted, the beneficiaries, to access this financing. Although on the other side, and I think, as Sarah, when she focuses on compliance, is to say to those people, you need to have your books in order. You need to be ready to be creditworthy, as the PST has said. You need to be able to put forward the right documentation and the right information to be able to access. So we will wait and see what happens and hope that we can all benefit from what has been provided for in this budget.
Thank you, Deloitte. Patronella, to be specific. Dr. Adam Mugume, your blank check is before you. You have a pen, you have the brain. What figure are you putting on?
Thank you so much. My colleagues have said the budget is optimistic. Actually, my view is that it seems to be more fact-based than being optimistic. There are risks, yes, and I think PSST has raised a record on risks in the horizon, and also the colleague from Absa, South Africa. But I think to the fact that it is based on particular facts that we are seeing in the horizon, and also you are seeing measures that are being put in place to ensure that things work. For example, one of the things that has always disturbed my understanding is how we can go into a project and borrow money, and the project remains unimplemented for many, many years. The so-called undispersed borrowings, that are stood in the range of $4 billion per year over many years. So to the extent that the budget, PSST has said, emphasizing project implementation, making sure that you are reducing public deficits that feed into public debt, and making sure that we are targeting wealth creation and industrialization. Overall, I think it makes me more, more inclined to believe that really we are moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good messages coming through. Private sector, it all boils down around you. There are so many SMEs out there, but we'll talk about later. It's a blank check.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, you know, same time last year, when we finished getting the speech, the debate was so much rotating about questioning the allocation to infrastructure. We got a lot of pressure that government was putting a lot of money into the infrastructure. It's going to be a white elephant. Why don't you bring money into the welfare issues? We thank government for standing their ground firmly, that even in this budget, they have actually added 3 trillion. We thank you very much for taking that ground to realize that you cannot do much in economic development when you don't invest into the infrastructure. For us as private sector, we respect that because it is very difficult to invest into development infrastructure. That is one thing that we uptake in this budget, and we thank government continuously on that. We again pray that next year, Mr. PS, we are glad if you added more 5, and it keeps increasing that way. Thank you.
As long as you give him the 5, via Cherengat, he will add it. But the conversation continues, and we're going to be looking at some of the issues raised in the discussions. The preparation of projects seems to be running through very many issues. It has ripple effects. It's not just the project that gets delayed, it is also the anticipated ripple effect that that project should have brought in. You can imagine if some 2 billion would have been spent 5 years ago, this economy would be far. But as you have said, some of the accounting officers need really to account and show reason why they should not move on if they cannot implement a number of these projects. We lose quite a lot, and this is the conversation of the risks and uncertainties that we are trying to look at. I'm glad the AHA is being conversed. It is right where it belongs. It is now diplomacy and politics. But those conversations we are watching from afar, and we really will be happy to see them take on and continue. I want to get back to Absa. You hinted on some risks, and I know banks really are the best assessors of risk. We might leave them with the money. The report I'm reading from BOU inspection and supervision and survey among the bankers, in the quarter January to March, applicants for loans had applied for over $1 trillion, but the banks only advanced about half of that because of risks. It's not that they didn't have the money, but when they look at the profile of borrowers, the risks are out there. So from the Absa where you sit and representation of the other bankers, what are real risks within this economy that even when money is found, people fear to really put it out there? Because I can hear even SMEs as they are sent to you, government may think you have not lent to them. I don't think that was the decision, because you have a mild criteria you look through. So what are the key risks within the economy that we should be concerned about, and how do we resolve them?
Okay, thank you very much. So we are coming out of COVID, Ukraine, and so many other challenges that we've gone through as a global economy. And from the banking world, it takes some time for those to land. We're looking at the numbers the other day, and we can see the non-performing assets go up. So clearly, there's a bit of pressure from a business perspective that we are looking at, and we need to lend cautiously. And that's why I think some of us have talked about ensuring you have the right books, keeping the right records. But guess what? There's also money out there. But I think coming from the budget, I like the fact that government is cognizant of the fact that it can't continue borrowing domestically, because that way it clouds out the private sector. So with that in place, we hope that an inflation going down, we do hope to see that the rates will come down and the credit trends should be able to pick up. But we need to watch out in the sense that those assumptions come through. The other bit is that we have had a stable exchange rate. I think PST talked about the AHA. It's something that we're carefully watching out what that actually means, because part of that have been inflows that have really increased our deposits and our ability to lend out and also manage the exchange rate. So we do believe that the president will have those discussions with the key stakeholders to manage that. But I think on the whole, if we continue to see a good business environment and are pleased to pay off government suppliers much faster, I think we should have a much better economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think those are messages we want to hear out there. They may not necessarily be fixed by mega projects, because these are software. After you've done the hardware, we still see a lot of risks on the software side, and we want to see how these get resolved. I want to make a quote from paragraph 2 of the minister's speech, which he also was quoting the president's statement in 2021. He said, Madam Speaker, His Excellency the President declared this Kisanja for socio-economic transformation. So while opening the parliament on 24th of May, 2021, the president said, and the minister quotes, and so I want to quote the minister quoting the president, now that we have laid the foundation by building roads, hospitals, schools, water sources, and other public services, the focus should be turned to creating wealth, jobs, and incomes. The foundation was set. The infrastructure is out there. Why haven't we taken advantage of that? These are questions we want to go back with. And eventually the roads break down. They can't be there forever, and we have seen that happen. So how do we make sure we really leverage this infrastructure? What is holding out the private sector from taking advantage of this infrastructure? The power lines are there, the roads are there, the standard gauge is coming, the meter gauge is coming. What are you not seeing? My name is Sheikh Muhumza.
Thank you very much. Where starts the question or the answer? When you look at, let's say, the rural or economic development, the business enhancers are not one pack. It's an integrated system. An integrated system that ensures there is one availability of the would-be productive resources, the would-be raw materials, on the part of us, the industrialists. There should be a distribution system. There should be an aggregation system for the raw materials. Abundance of raw materials in an area is not a sufficient condition alone. There are other sufficient conditions. Then we must be able to have the skill and what we call the OPEX, the operation capital, for these people to mobilize the resources. Then we aggregate the resources, and then we add value to these resources, and then we create the economy that is functional. That can, why we say it is integrated, is we have so many times seen selective approach on the part of government and on the part of some of the other players, local government as well, NGOs as well, where you simply target a single group and you say, we have injected money here, we expect the rural economy to take off, and eventually it fails. Putting the infrastructure in terms of the road alone may not be enough. We have seen electricity extended, by the way, into these areas, and we thank government. But when you go deep to analyze, you find that the electricity that is there is very good at making the box for political votes stick. But the box for the industry to use this power is not able to tick. Why? the phase 3 electricity that we use to process these things is not there. Who has the power to influence the availability of a transformer in a rural area? I don't think any of us can answer it in this room. Is it UMEME? Is it UDC? Is it the Ministry of Finance? Is it the local government? Is it trade? In there we get some ambiguities. So that is where we say, when it comes to movement, let's look at integrated approach, so that some resources don't move faster and the other resources come later, and yet they are supposed to be supplementary in a way. That is one thing that originates from the integrated planning point of view. Then the other thing is how the systems work. When you are coming to boost productivity, you should be thinking the uptake of these outputs you are going to produce, and be thinking of the market. For instance, you wouldn't believe, Mr. Moderator, that our biggest market so far is in South Sudan and Congo as an economy. But for something to go to Elegu, it has to come to Kampala from Kitgum, be processed in Kampala, then transported back through Elegu, and it goes to South Sudan. So when you ask such a simple questions, you find that if there was some sort of rethinking the approaches, we could start to take certain processing units closer to where the market is, other than now letting it continue being in an ambiguous way. Thank you.
That's the private sector giving us their position, and I think this now speaks to the policy side. Where should we be putting the industrial parks? And for what? You don't just throw it there and say, now that it is there, people will respond. They are looking at an ecosystem. So who decides where an industrial park should be? I think PSST has hinted on some of those risks of who is in the policy-making space. Some farmers are in policy-making spaces, and they are deciding certain things. Those are risks we are trying to see, that if we don't read the movements of the private sector, we might end up investing in their areas, and yet we are not supporting them. And I really want to again flash paragraph 25 of the budget speech. I hope what I have is what you have. Some of these things only work in the Bible, where when they say chapter and verse, we are all there. Some documents shift because of softwares that you're using. But paragraph 25, Minister was giving us the budget priorities, and he said in subsection 1, urgent completion of key public investments with higher multiplier effects. So, Mr. PSST, as we review the projects, not only those that have delayed, I'm glad you hinted on the NDP 3. People should be referring to the revised one. We may also want to come back and say which ones have higher multiplier effects. Because the real risk we want to deal with is the one sitting on debt. Debt, now we cannot get forgiveness. That is a bigger risk. We may not easily get it. So how easily do we get the debt off? The 8.4 trillion that is revolving, the 6.1% that is interest payment. How do we deal with these issues? We need to step up the growth as fast as we can, but also we need to net out the expenditures so that we can create some fiscal room for the PSST to be able to resolve some of these backlogs that is carrying, which were created very many years back. Talking of revenues, I know your plan is laid out. What risks do you foresee? Because as PSST indicated, the first risk he's seeing on his desk is in the event the revenues don't come through. What risks do you see there? You don't have to tell us the planned measures, but what risks, just in case you alert those who are in those risk spaces. You don't have to release your strategy, but what risks do you foresee on the revenue collection side?
Thank you. It's it's a very thin line between discussing the risks and the solutions. But by and largely, as domestic revenue mobilizers, we are looking at it from a positive outlook. We are looking at a mix of an economy that is largely informal, with the small taxpayers that do not keep records, that are not technology driven, they are not up to date with technology, and with the mindset that they surely want government to help more than they should pay their tax and also help government. So this type of taxpayers require that we have to do a lot of engagements. So there is a risk that the taxpayer will say, me, I only know trading license. I don't know tax for URA. They are much more aware of a trading license because it is the first document that you need to open up that business. But for me as a taxman to come and collect that tax 1 year after this business has started is collecting tax from money that has already been spent. And that is the difficulty in mobilizing domestic revenue. The paperwork will tell you that you made profit of maybe 100, but these are historical figures, and yet the tax administrator wants to collect that tax at that point. So it really takes a lot of engagement, a lot of support from the taxpayer to believe that I must pay this tax to government to facilitate government, to run government operations. So we want to do a lot of sensitization in terms of education, educating our taxpayers that they should really understand the tax policies at hand and how they impact on their businesses. So if this taxpayer is informed, then this taxpayer will be it will be easy to win them into paying tax. Of course, education will require that we will also educate them on technology. As URA, we are looking at technology as the key driver in this revenue mobilization. Technology has been the game changer, and we still look at improving some of the enhancements in this technology to enhance tax compliance. We are trying to simplify the tax system to inform businesses of those informal taxpayers. For example, if I stop you and you are a truck driver, you just have one truck, you are moving maybe food from the village to Kampala. There is what we call advance tax, income tax that is payable by this driver, about 100,000 per month, 120. So I stop this driver and he needs to pay. We now have the USSD. You will just go into your system as a driver and click pay the way you do mobile money transactions, the way you pay national water, umeme, and pay that tax to URA. And you don't have to park the car, go and look for where to get a tax identification number, and then you are registered. And so we are simplifying really processes so that this money can easily be collected. And there is now what we call the instant TIN. You can get that TIN instantly, again using your phone. You do not require internet. Again, you can use a phone to send to us a message, and we give you that instant TIN. Within 5 to 10 minutes, you get this TIN. All we need is your ID, the NIN. If you have a NIN, we will be able to register you. Increasingly, we are looking at the integration with the other government MDAs, like, for example, the Uganda Registration Services Bureau. If we use the NIN, we are able to pick the details of this taxpayer, where they are located, their villages. You know, the NIN is very important. It will even show your clan, your father, your grandfather, that type of precision. So we want to know our taxpayers. So those are the risks that we are looking. And then the other risk is the risk of tax evasion. there is a very big risk of under-declaration and poor record keeping. So even when you move from the informal sector to the formal sector, people want to under-declare. There are those definitely that will declare and just pay their fair share of tax. We appreciate those ones. But there are those that will definitely under-declare. Our systems now with technology makes it very transparent. You could have put this tender and won it and then supplied a manufacturer, ABC. And when this manufacturer is paying you, they withhold 6%. And so you have a turnover, say 100 billion. And we are seeing you got this money paid to you of 200 billion by manufacturer X through our e-tax system. So that level of transparency will help us curb the such tax leakages. And then we also want to do a lot of information sharing, both internally and externally. We have there is a bill now that is awaiting to be assented to by the President, exchange of information, and this will help us access information globally. Once we have this information, we have very many Ugandans who are high net worth, very rich, but they are not paying a fair share of their tax. And some of this money is located elsewhere in other countries. We will get this information and we will be able to put you to pay a fair share of this tax. We have done a creation of this unit now in the large taxpayers department, the high net worth unit, and high net worth largely relies on information, third-party information. So if you look at risks of information, risks of non-compliance, we really must do our piece of work very differently next financial year. As revenue administrators, we are first looking into engagements. When you speak to our clients, we will be able to understand how their businesses are faring. We just want to tax a fair share of tax and nothing more and nothing less. Of course, we are cognizant that there are some sectors of the economy that we really feel we may not be getting a fair share of the tax. The PSST has already alluded to this, and we are also using consultants to support us get more of this information so that we can be able to tax a fair share. As the taxpayers get more complex, we are also not sleeping as URA. We are doing a lot of benchmarking, a lot of training, and using consultants to support us into this agenda. So the risks are there. However, we are up to the task. We want to live to it, and because these numbers, the budget really, we must mobilize this 29 trillion to support government operations. Thank you, Chair.
You have had the risks and the strategies in tax revenues, and now that the President noted on that, we will take advantage and flip over the President's statement that if we give us the backing that we need from him, the revenues will come in. PSST, we really want to be sure that there are no godparents in tax, because some of them know those routes, but let's meet there at the Supreme Court and win the battle there. If any goes anywhere, we certainly should be able to defeat them. I know there are some who are still not liking to pay their tax, but the technology issue is very critical. A friend of mine, I don't want to say myself because you may have a different opinion of me, but a friend of mine whom we share really good credentials was asked to issue an EFRIS invoice. See, now what is that? Yeah, we had to go to tax consultants, we had to go to URA. Now what is this? We just used to issue our invoices by pen, stamp, and issue and get paid. Now things are getting a little bit more complicated. So your work is cut out. It's not just the bottom of the pyramid businesses. It can be as high as those levels. But you are up to the task. We want to trust that you'll be able to handle that. Dr. Mugume, I know I was reading how Sri Lanka disappeared. one point, they had $7.5 billion of reserves, 2029. By 2021, they had $25 million left. Reserves can disappear overnight. I have seen Ugandans, we are very happy coffee exports are now $800 million. When I look through our imports per month, that's not even 2 months of imports. So coffee can only support us for 6 weeks of imports. How is our kitty looking there in terms of the foreign sector? Is there a risk we should be concerned about from where you sit? Is there a possibility we might wake up one morning and we can't pay for drugs, for fuel, or even debt service? How is the external sector? What are the risks you see out and in that you want to speak to?
Well, let me start with the external risk, because the external risks are the ones that feed into reserves. External risks meaning what? Our exports. I think we have had the geopolitical tensions. We export, it is true that we export largely to the commercial region. Actually, the commercial region takes more than 52% of our exports. And that is basically, when we say commercial, it is actually 3 or 4 countries. We are talking about Kenya, DRC, South Sudan, and of recent we have seen Rwanda re-emerging and a bit of Tanzania. Now, probably this is where I can also correct. There are some numbers which are normally reported about exports to DRC, and we only take formal exports to DRC and leave out informal. The DRC trade is a bit tricky, because when you go to Bunagana, for example, people take goods from Kampala, offload them in the Bunagana side of Uganda, and start carrying small by small across the border. For one reason, to evade taxes. So once you only take therefore formal trade with DRC, you distort the whole picture. Actually, our trade with DRC is as close to as one of Kenya. Close to, actually the difference is Kenya, as 12 months to April, was leading by around to $800 million worth of exports, followed by DRC at around $790 million, if you add both informal and formal trade. Now, why I'm bringing that is, so once our market, which is basically 3 or 4 countries, we need to say those are where our export proceeds come from, and therefore be able to build the reserve. The other exports which are more influenced by global geopolitics, again, is Europe. Our fish, etc., go to Europe. That's where we see a bit of risk. But across the region, probably the biggest risk is now South Sudan, to some extent, and DRC because of the wars. So because combining South Sudan and North Sudan, you are talking about more than 800 million worth of goods exported there. So the question therefore is, if the war was to spill over into South Sudan, to what extent will that affect our exports? And that is a big risk. Now, inability to export means that we are unable to buy the dollars from the market to build the reserves. So currently we are projecting to have around $4.1 billion of reserves by end of June. But as again, because of debt servicing, we have to be buying dollars from the market almost every day to be able to preserve our reserves. So if our exports are not doing quite well, automatically it will hit our reserves. Similarly, other source of dollars is tourism. I think we have talked about tourism. Leave alone our workers who are in the so-called Nkubacheyo. Those are also bringing in more than 1.4 billion, as the minister said yesterday, and also tourism of around 1 billion. So all those are the sources that bring in the dollars, which we are able to buy in the market and therefore build the reserves. So the ability, therefore, to get the exports booming both in terms of goods and services, will automatically is a risk actually that can hit our reserves. Now, can we reach Sri Lanka? The answer is certainly not feasible at this time, simply because every day we are looking at the way our reserves are and what measures we can take. In some cases, that's where we always forward letters to the Ministry of Finance, warning them that, you know what, if you don't reduce on external debt servicing, we are also likely to enter into the Sri Lanka scenario. And I think PSST has already mentioned that actually they are looking at that more closely. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. The very comforting thing was the statement the president said he has now taken charge of debt. You really need it at that level. I have spent the last 20 years closely working with the Ministry of Finance, and the thing I hated the most was anybody turning up with anything, and all we are required to do is to process their debt request. Now the real Minister of Finance, who constitutionally is the president, is taking charge of that space. So anybody coming in, we are going to reflect on the minister. And when I say we, I come from Makerere University. My chancellor, I'm happy to see you here. And from the MOBS Economics Forum, PSST set up that unit with the support of Makerere University. We are going to generate knowledge for policy. So I'm not here to only do this conversation moderation. I'm picking issues that I must be able to crystallize and take back to the decision makers on how do we go about these conversations, because we must make the economy grow. First of all, to meet the needs of the population, but also to meet these other imposed needs of debt service that are on us, preserve our reserves. I know one of the mistakes Sri Lanka made was at the agricultural level. They said they are going organic. Some of these statements look nice, but there is a lot of detail hidden under them. They went organic, and the pests and diseases really treated them harshly. Before they knew it, they had a big import bill for food, which began to run down their reserves. So they are nice statements. We want to go consciously on them, and when we do, please know where we are coming from. I know the irrigation people, we have already summoned them to have conversations with the water catchment areas. If you know you are going to irrigate rice and maize, the agronomist must tell us how much water is needed per week for the 20,000 acres of rice in that region. Then the Ministry of Water must come and tell us whether that water is available in that region. Only then shall we begin the irrigation project. We are learning from history. You remember the energy people went and put a dam somewhere in Jinja? Before we knew it, Lake Victoria was dry, or at least drying up. And young people who used to say, I will love you until Lake Victoria dries, we are getting worried, because it was actually happening. Right now, the Ministry of Water must sanction how much water must be drawn out. So all these projects, we want the systemic approach that the private sector has called for. Or else we are going to end up with projects that don't give us the returns the Ministry of Finance is looking for. I want to come to Petronella. I don't know that it is tax advisory, it is audit, but you people do all these things. So from where you sit at a governance level, at a critical review level, because this is what we do for us in the academia, we are happy to critically examine. So when you hear us come and criticizing everything, that's what we are trying to do. Critically review. Don't give a clean bill of health until the lab report has come out. So I'm like a lab technician who must look at your blood sample, your stool, no matter how smelly it is, we have to look at it. And then we send that report to the doctor. Gob is here, he needs to hear. From where you sit, from the reviews you do, you don't have to give us any samples, but from the generalization of what you see as an audit house, as an entity there that takes these views on sectors to see whether they are going concern farms, what messages do you want to give us at this point in time?
So ours is very simple. And like you've said, sometimes we do have the benefit of associating with the regulators and then associating with, the private players. So we do hear the concerns from both sides. And I think a lot has been said about what needs to be done from a private sector perspective. So, when Sarah talks about ensuring that people are compliant, they are keeping books of account, they are contributing their fair share to the economy or to the taxes. On the other hand, the private sector is looking to government and hoping then that government can, provide, whether it's funding, when it comes to the Revenue Authority, just being a partner to them and being cognizant of the pressures that they are facing in the current climate. So it is then to say where funding, where budget allocations are being made. The auditor comes in afterwards to say, okay, this has been done, the year has ended, what happened? We don't critique, we just give an opinion on something. It is very important that we are picking lessons from what we are doing. PDM, there's money that has come through PDM. If we look back on the projects that have been done and funding that has been provided, whether it's, EMIOGA, different, what things have we picked up and what can government learn from that? Has there been dialogue with the different beneficiaries or intended beneficiaries for them to say to government, this is, money has been received, but would have liked that this is actually what it did, or this is the support we would have liked to see. A few days ago, I was privileged to be part of a conversation where someone said, from our area, people are not looking for loans. What people actually want is, they have maize, and they're saying, we want a truck to transport that maize. So there's a lot of money that has been put in infrastructure. So if the roads are there, for that person who's out there, who's growing maize, and his problem is not the ability to actually, have something to sell. Their problem is the ability to have that maize transported or bought. So they are looking for market. That's what they are looking for. So those are the kinds of things from an implementation and monitoring perspective that are very important. Let's pick lessons as we go along. Let's keep feeding back to know, is it working? There are projects that have been implemented on paper. They could, look good and they could make sense, but are they actually working? Then I think the last for me, and this comes very much from almost a tax perspective. We've talked a lot about, for our exports, we export to the region. One of the things we have to be cognizant of are our relations with the region. A number of players in the private sector who are in the export business will tell you, we exported maize and it has not, this country won't accept it. Trucks are at the border because country X or Y has not, has said they don't want Ugandan maize, they don't want Ugandan milk. So I think it's for that private sector player, they are doing the right things. They are trying to be in business and they are willing to contribute towards, the country's GDP. But their request then is to say, can someone from the policy side, from the government side, talk to our neighbors just to ensure that if we say we are, East Africa is, we are in a common customs union, can we actually send our goods to Kenya rather than be stuck with things that then get spoiled? And there's a loss of income someone has borrowed, took credit to actually be able to finance that, and they are losing out. So postmortem is important because it helps us look back and see whether or not what we were thinking when we started out has actually actualized, or there are things we need to tweak to be able to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Patronella. The key message is coming out here. It's neither here nor there. And that's why really quite often want to discourage people who analyze the budget by sectors, that this sector has not been given enough. Chelengat has already told us House is leveraging ICT. So any failures in issuing national IDs is going to affect tax revenue. Because many of us are still using NINs of our relatives, friends, and in-laws, including the dead ones. So how do I get a NIN, a tax identification number, when the NIN I am using was of my deceased cousin? Everybody needs their own NIN if we are to move forward. She's really mentioned the issue of quality, and this is the message we are really emphasizing on the implementation of the parish development model. It's not just financial inclusion, to give the money out there. The key message is coming out. The maize is not crossing the borders because of quality. So how do we make sure the person who receives PDM money produces maize that can cross over to South Sudan and be accepted, can cross over to Kenya and be accepted? This is not just the financial inclusion. And I think Adam Mugume has really looped this in. It's not just about that maize failing to cross there, it's also about the reserves. Because if that maize does it, these are our trading partners. They're the South Sudan, it's Kenya, it's DRC. If our maize doesn't go, we might find problems paying our external debt, because we have to rely on that maize. So this is the conversation we really want to have. At what risks await the implementation of the budget, and how do we address them? I want to open up this conversation to you online. You possibly are sitting in the comfort of your sitting room. You might actually even be in the car or under a tree, because these days NTV can be watched streaming wherever you are. Please, this conversation involves you, and I want to pick a few comments from you. It could be a question. You can direct it to anybody, even if it is the PSST. He may not be on his chair, but we will be able to convey that message and to convey the feedback back to you. It may be a comment, your view, whether you're online or in the house. We want to open up this conversation to you. Where are my microphones and where are they moving? Yesterday, I lost 2% of my cows. It was one calf that died. Now you know how big my herd is. 2% of my cows died. I'm really bothered. The reason was no extension service that should have looked at that calf before it died. I couldn't afford getting a vet there. Sarah, you have 2 minutes enough for you guys.
Hello.
You can introduce yourself just in case I've just mentioned you and you changed names last night. Can the microphone work? Because I know Sarah works. Okay.
Thank you very much. Sarah Birete is my name, the Executive Director, Center for Constitutional Governance. I have 4 quick questions directed to the PSST and the other panelists. One is on the policy commitment, where the PSST said they have provided a partial budget for the national census. This is unforeseeable, it's unavoidable. And he concluded saying he wants to eliminate supplementary budgeting, which is a distortion of our budget process. Isn't this an announcement, an official announcement of a supplementary budget? Why do you budget partially for an activity you must do? And the other distortions of the budget, apart from the supplementary budgets, is the use or misuse of the 3% provision in our Public Finance Act, where we saw in this budget that we are concluding, where government paid for items that Parliament had not approved and had clearly blocked. So how do we make sure that such things are eliminated? The other distortion of the budget is the unfunded priorities. If something is a priority, why do you keep it unfunded? Can you either shield it until when you are able to fund it? Why do we keep with this listing of unfunded priorities in our budget system? My second question is on the structure of the economy. And the PSST said it's difficult, together with the commissioner from URA, it's difficult to tax some elements of our economy because of the way it is structured. We have been debating some agricultural taxes online for quite a while. And what came out key as a big possible cash cow for the revenue generation was cow tax. But using that as an example, why don't we tax agricultural products at a point of sale? I think that would help us somehow get or reduce the debt trap that we seem to be stuck in as a country. The third question is on the digital transformation, which is part of the budget theme for this year. There are good suggestions of e-government, e-procurement, and the rest, to reduce human-to-human contact. But why do we keep debating digital transformation in this country with the continued closure of Facebook for 3 years now? Facebook locks out majority young people from e-commerce. What are we doing as a country? Are we just looking at e-government or digital transformation for government while locking out citizens from digital transformation? And my last question, Mr. Moderator, is on the strategies for improving tax morale among the citizens. Everybody has highlighted failure to generate projected revenue as a risk, both PSST and the commissioner from URA. How do we improve measures for fiscal satisfaction, trust in government, and national pride so that we encourage or more citizens are motivated to pay tax? I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. The PSST will respond to what you would have heard.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Daniel Ayebare, and today I come in the position of the chairperson of the Financial Literacy Association of Uganda. One of the key challenges in this implementation really for me is the challenge of ignorance. Because we are talking about a policy we are talking about an item that affects every Ugandan. And one of the challenges that we've had is bringing down this knowledge to the person at the last mile. So financial literacy is about having the knowledge, the skill, and the confidence to manage money well. And as much as I'm talking about the person at the last mile, someone might be tempted to think I'm talking about the people in the village. There are even people in suits here that really don't know how to manage their money well. So what our association is provided for in the National Financial Inclusion Strategy and the National Financial Literacy Strategy. I'm calling upon everyone here, ladies and gentlemen, in all your respective capacities, to join us. And for us, we welcome everyone. There's no, we train everyone to be a trainer, so we want to see that by at least the next 5 years, we have soldiers, foot soldiers in financial literacy on the ground. And for you, Dr. Mhumuza, I would like also to say whether there is a way we can join your group at MOOBS to be able to share with you our experiences, because one of our mandates will be helping with the monitoring and evaluation of how this strategy is going. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The appointment will be settled today.
Thank you.
But we are going to change our language. Not many people want to be told you are financially ignorant. They will switch off. By the time you're done with the teaching, this is diplomatic language. So maybe financial literacy, what language can we use? There is somebody there.
Yes, I'm Chris Kayonga, working with NTV. I have a couple of questions for PSST and some on the panel.
You reduce on the couple of questions and do a few. Thank you.
Firstly, recalling the episode where government proposed to borrow from a Kenyan moneylender, and what that says about our options in terms of where we're going to borrow this external financing. This is also in the context of our credit rating with Finch, our what we're calling AHA, the implications of all that, which sort of looks like we're running out of options where we can borrow this money. PSST could clarify on that. Secondly, there is the revenue-based budgeting versus expenditure-based budgeting. We've been pursuing an expenditure model around our budgeting, and that drives deficit financing. It was really insightful that PS Govi mentioned that I think the first quarter, all the public financing was based on revenue collected. Can we see that as a model going forward, and what will it take? Lastly, the interest rate risk associated with increased external borrowing. What mitigating factors? Because so for example, China lowers its policy rate, that's good. But then suddenly it's responding to a cooling down in the economy, the interest rate goes up. So those interest rate fluctuations pose a risk as we're exposed externally. I would like to hear some mitigations around that. Thank you.
Right in front of you, that hand, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamza. My name is Joseph Chitamrike. I work with a company called Altex, which is a securities market operating in Kampala. I have two areas that I want to comment on. The first one is on the pricing of securities. You know, when you are pricing bonds, we speak in terms of premiums and discounts. So when we listen to the budget, the two things that we listen to that people might not be aware of, one of them, the inflation projection, because that helps us to determine the yield at which we shall buy or sell these securities. And whenever you have the higher it goes, the lower the price of the bonds. Okay? Secondly, the second thing we listen to, we call it the truth discount. We listen very carefully, and some of the things we weigh and say, is the government going to be able to fulfill this thing? Are they actually going to do this? So when I had the minister yesterday talk about not buying vehicles, finally, not buying new vehicles for, except for a certain prescribed number of officers, I felt there's a bit of a truth question in there. But we shall wait and see whether government is going to spend money on vehicles that are not already bought. Okay? The second thing, there are two other things, but they are related. Second issue is Namave. I was associated with the origination of Namave many years ago. I think it was Honorable Sendaula who handed me the instrument of degazettement around 1999, I think. And this is 2023, and the Namave is still not developed. But every year we celebrate a statement. Now we are going to do some roads. We have put aside money for this road, for the other. But Namave should have been fully occupied by this time, employing Ugandans. So the implementation question, the time we're taking to get critical projects implemented in Uganda sometimes points to why we are suffering to overcome the difficulties, the economic difficulties that we find. And I say that because I speak about employment in Namave because I think the projection for employment in Namave was more than 20,000 Ugandans when fully built. So when you look at the tax numbers that we saw come from Deloitte earlier, the analysis they gave us, clearly pay as you earn, we have an opportunity to restructure tax. And I think if we listen to the PS carefully, he says some places are difficult to collect tax from. I think he was saying tax is hard to apply wherever you are. And I think Chelengat was also saying the same thing. But it's very easy to collect pay as you earn because you know the employer. And so if you look at the amount we collect in terms of pay as you earn and other, compare that with the other domestic taxes, you'll find that I think it's necessary for us to start to focus on the question of employment, that kind of employment, the formal employment in industry, so that we can collect tax. So I just want to add emphasis that maybe we need to start thinking in terms of restructuring our tax ambition, so that instead of collecting international trade taxes, we focus. I mean, we can project a day when we are collecting zero from international trade, but we are collecting, we are replacing taxes from international trade with a tax from employment within Uganda. I thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of issues to pick up. Why don't you, let's clear that desk and then we'll get back here. And then anybody online, I need to hear that. I will not miss you out here. There are issues really coming through. I'm receiving messages of people who earn wages. Do we do pay as you earn on wages? Because some of it's working per hour. I pay you every time we have a client. So I mean, if nobody walks in today, your 10K is not there. You go home, I don't know how. This is a very dicey space, so it's not just for tax purposes, but also how do you protect the people we are calling employed? Because some of those employed in this country earn wages, and the employers are very clear. It will depend. If Absa comes and holds an event here with NTV, the fellows you've been serving us still get paid. That's not Serena, of course. Serena is a different category. But that's the basic of the SME, restaurants, and whatever service providers in the sector. Can we rely on those for tax purposes? What projection do you make when people are waiting? If there is a wedding and we get business, I will call you girls and boys, we work, then I pay you. How does Chirengat gradually fix her revenue projection on such kind of employment? So there are issues to deal with in the law and in the realities in order to remove those uncertainties. And a lot of unemployed people are really in that category. Namamve really is something I take a note of. 1999 is when we began. But now when I'm driving on Ginger Road, I actually find an industrial site in Imbarara, and there are many people walking. So where did we get it wrong? Goes back to the private sector. Where should we put an industrial park? Maybe if we had decided started in 1999 in Imbarara, would now be far. Would Namamve ever... Any Muganda here to tell us what Namamve means? Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Sophia Chome and I work with Balton, Uganda, and we deal in fertilizers, agric inputs, seeds, greenhouses, solar irrigation systems. So this budget actually speaks for us, and we are grateful to that. And I'm going to address myself to two key issues. And for me, I'm not, as we said, we are looking at different ways of seeing how our economy grows. My teething issues have always been, and I think PSST talked about it, that is lack of goal consensus. The issue here is we are talking about financial literacy, inclusion, and everything like that. But one key question that I always ask myself is that where do we start to educate people about financial understanding or inclusion and stuff like that? You go to our schools and right from primary education up to probably university, if one hasn't taken a choice to be, say, to study finance or entrepreneurship, actually they are optional subjects. You wonder, why isn't it a concerted effort within the education sector planning to say, these are key pointers. Uganda is a country with a very young population, and we believe that the young people need to be brought on board to understand the financial issues, the taxation issues at that level, such that as they are growing, they are not getting, we are not even creating entities to train Ugandans financial literacy. We have our universities and stuff like that. How is that being considered or part of the programming so that it's something that is, I feel like is very basic and doesn't need big budgets, and that would take us a long way into sorting some of these things. If these were part of things that in our syllabuses are, they make it like part of it so that people come up knowing what finance is all about. Then the other part of it, we are all looking at what we are going to deliver in the budget and domestic revenue collection. But the question I ask myself, the expenditure side, how are we doing on the expenditure side? The leakages are too enormous. You know, just look at one person on the road of Uganda having 4 lead cars with I don't know how many people. You know, you just look at the public expenditure, and as Omuntu once you're like, really? You know, it doesn't make sense when we are trying to fix things and then we are not efficient and we are not optimizing on the budget that we have. I feel that is something that really we need to address. Those inefficiencies, the poor planning. I think why even our debt burden is so big are these projects that we try to get, then we get funding, and then government did not plan for that, and therefore they have to wait for another financial year. Interest is growing on the debt, and it's business as usual. So one wonders, as much as the budget is read and with all these speeches, how far can we trust what we are hearing? When we are talking about the young people, and we cannot even take our medical interns for training, and they are entitled to that so that they can get into the money economy, so that they can work. And we are really encouraging the brain drain of this young economy to Cheyo, so that we can probably get Cheyo money instead of getting the technocrats in this country. I thank you because I know many other people have issues. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Sophia. We have to do a few things. We need to communicate a message. The people in Ministry of Water, please, I want you to come out and give us messages on El Nino implications. Climate change is an issue that PSST raised. I hear the diaspora is talking about El Nino. We want that message to factor into the risks and how they can best be managed. Dr. Calist will be coming to have that conversation to feed in here. We also heard about the young people she has talked about. How are we going to resolve the issue of doctors? The budget speech is very spot on a number of health facilities that have been upgraded, 381 from health center 2 to 3, 250 from 3 to 4, and the ministry has come up to say health center 3s will have 50, or rather 3 doctors. Health Center 4 will now have 5 doctors. That's a big pool of doctors that we're going to need going forward. How are we resolving the internship issues? The minister pledged arrears on those who finished. The ones who are supposed to be deployed on 1st of April are not yet deployed. Are we balancing out well the health sector and human capital development issues? So quite a number of conversations that we see as risks and uncertainties in the policy space that need to come through. As we informed you, we are live on NTV and want to appreciate the time given to us in partnership with Absa. Now we need to sign off our TV audience rightly and officially, but the conversation will continue a little longer. Those on social media, you can still continue following us, but those live on NTV, we need to sign you off, and this is not me to do it, but certainly Mumba. Why don't you come and give a closing remark at this point in time for our live audience on TV, and then we'll continue and finish this conversation. Over to you, MD Absa.
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza, and thank you to our panelists for the discussion so far. I think on behalf of Absa Bank, I would like to thank you all for your participation, especially to our distinguished guests that were able to make it here this morning. This is an important deliberation, as I said in my opening remarks. It is a joint effort between ourselves, the government, the private sector. I think it is a task that cannot be left to government alone. So on our part is to acknowledge, first of all, the positive sentiment and work that has gone into being able to deliver a budget. A budget is a plan. It sets direction in terms of where the government wants to take a particular country. Will it be perfect? The reality is no. Are there positives in the budget? Yes, there are a lot of positives. Is there progress that is being made in terms of economic transformation? Yes. The numbers speak for themselves. GDP growth projections of 6% coming out of just 5% in the current fiscal year. So that is something that we should commend. Inflation coming down. Last year, December, we were at around 10.6%. That has dropped to 6.2%. What does that mean for the wider economy? It means that there is positivity in the overall environment, and that points to the direction in terms of the policy stance that has been taken on interest rates. Are there challenges in the environment? Totally aligned, there are challenges. I think as you've listened to the panelists, listening to our economists earlier on, there is alignment in terms of the opportunities and risks. So the challenge really arises in how do we capitalize on the opportunities that the budget presents from a human capital development perspective, from an infrastructure investment perspective. What do we see as opportunities that we can harness together and try and optimize them as we contribute to driving the economic growth of our country? So, ladies and gentlemen, I think in summarizing, first of all, to thank you once again for your participation and to challenge each and every one of us to walk away from here saying, how can we partner with the government in driving this economy forward? What role do we have to play in broadening the tax base? What role do we have to play in contributing or doing our part in terms of contributing to the fiscus, whilst challenging the government as well to ensure that there is that fiscal discipline? They have responded through the fiscal consolidation program. So there is response. Do we live in a perfect world? No. But for me and where I stand from, the positive momentum that we are making is something that should be commended. The ability to set the scene in terms of coming up with a document that provides direction in terms of growth and opportunities that we see in the environment, I think it's something that should be commended. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, to thank you for your presence. Thank you for your deliberate and candid questions. And as our moderator has indicated to our online audience, we thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be signing out from here. But for the people that are in the room, we shall continue to have the conversation. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.